Okay, so a good afternoon to all of you. People online, in case you're able to hear, just drop a comment. Okay, so today we're going to discuss paper 1 of political science, and after that we'll also have a discussion, I think, in the coming days on paper 2, okay, both of them. And our idea for both of them, acha, it is also, I think, started to rain outside, so I think some of you will also be joining online, okay. Now I think some people here are students of crash course, maybe some of you are from the PSIR 300 program, and some of you, because this is happening on live YouTube, so you may just want to just see how the paper is, you want to just understand. So our purpose today is to, number one, go through the paper. I'll also give you a comparative analysis that every year some of the trends keep on changing, right? Like for example, this year we see, at least in paper 1B, there are more current affairs oriented questions, at least 4 or 5 questions of a current. But if you see the paper of last year, they were largely static, right? Similarly, if I say paper 1A, this year, it seems that the questions are more direct in nature, right? So if you followed your notes well, or if you followed, let's say, the crash course or any of the things that you've done, it would have been easy for you to follow and score, right? But the point is, how well have we been able to write these answers will also define, okay? So I'll go one by one, and for some of the questions I'll also tell you, for example, whether this question got repeated as a PYQ theme or the nature and syntax of the question. For example, in fascism, we directly see a question this year on the different strands of fascism, right? Usually a question on fascism we have seen is a quote based questions, but this also means whenever you do fascism, you also go into slightly its details. For example, we see here they've asked you a more specific case of how it is different in Italy and how is it different in Germany, okay? So Hitler's Nazism versus Mussolini's fascism, how are they different is the core concern here. So across these questions we'll have a look at one by one. I think most of the people have settled here. Definitely paper 2, and when I say paper 2, it is paper 2A, okay? So paper 2A definitely was on the difficult side this year. So most probably on Friday we'll have a discussion on paper 2 as well, in a lot of detail. In paper 2B and almost paper 2, you'll see heavy orientation of current affairs, and there were some questions like, for example, the very first question, the psychological approach, okay, for comparative politics. Paper 2 का पहला ही question है, or let's say a red lipstick movement, etc. These questions would have put students in some let's say these were not direct questions that you would expect, okay? So Rohan will also be taking those questions as well in the second session. Today our focus is paper 1, how to, let's see, make of this paper, right? So again, now my objective here is not only to just tell you, let's say, the takeaways, but we'll see it one by one. We'll see the difficulties of compulsory questions as well for both the blocks, that is question number 1 as well as question number 5, okay? Some students who are watching this may have already attempted the mains and they just want to understand, okay, how well have they performed. So even at the end I'll also have a section on them, but many of the students will be ones who are preparing for 2026 and beyond, okay? So whenever we see a paper, with the benefit of hindsight, okay, we should see all its dimensions, har tarah se. And in our case also, if you also have any questions here, people, and either in online mode, you are more than welcome to ask, because I want this to be almost a proper discussion so that we debate on all the sides of the paper, right? So we'll start one by one, and later on I'll also tell you the syllabus, and I will also map the topics, okay, according to the syllabus, which all questions got asked, what topics did not get asked this year. Okay, so are there any trends from that? We'll also try to see and understand, right? Okay. Abhi, so Rohan, I'll just take up the question, normative philosophical, वो वहाँ पे आ जाएगा, ठीक है? Just allow me a moment. Now, we see 5 questions in the first block, right? And later on, I'll come back to this slide and then map according to the syllabus. The very first question is the philosophical approach to the study of political theory. So first 5 questions I'll tell you, these are your compulsory. Philosophical approach, pehla, relationship between equality and liberty, but the crux of the question is they're asking you from a multicultural perspective, right? Third question is Macpherson's view on power. Then Italian and German brands of fascism. And last is the Marxist and the liberal approach towards the state. In fact, in the very test one, जो आपने PSI 300 का भी दिया है, उसमें direct question we've also asked you this question, okay? The Marxist and the liberal approach. Now, here at the very outset, okay, the questions don't seem that difficult. In fact, out of these 5, at least 3 questions have been directly repeated also from the previous year questions. So it is always a wise step to go through for each topic that you cover. You also do the PYQs. Now, the very first question, philosophical approach. So very first thing we would want to see, from which area is this coming in? So from which topic this is? Pehla ye, so political theory, meaning and approaches. When we do the approaches, okay, we do both the normative approach, we also do the empirical approach, okay. When we do the normative approach, we also go into philosophical approach, right? So for example, when I say philosophical approach, we directly start, for example, with the works of Plato. For example, Plato is philosophy and philosophy is Plato, right? And of course, this philosophical approach can also be seen in the works of, for example, Hegel later on. When Hegel, for example, says state is the march of God on earth, right or no? So this is a question, this you have seen previously, so directly from political theory, directly when we do the approaches, this question can be done. Now, I'll also share frameworks how to attempt these questions. Let's say this is a 10 marker. 10 markers will always be challenging. Kyun? You know so much and in a short span of time you have to write. I can give you a very elaborate discussion, sab kuch, but aap 10 marker mein nahi likh paoge. That is also the reality. So, how should you do this? So, here a simple framework is, if the question is a 10 marker, directly the introduction has to be very precise, not more than 2, at max 3 lines, 2.5 lines. Directly hit the core. Okay, we already know this is political theory, so don't start what is theory, what is political theory, what is approach, what is philosophical approach. आपका आधा page पूरा उसमें चला जाएगा, right? We have directly explained directly that what is philosophical approach either, or maybe just tell political theory is analyzed through various normative approaches, and one of them of course is a proper philosophical approach, right? And then directly in the body tell what is this philosophical approach about. So for this will talk about what ought to be than what is, okay? It will be rooted in norms, it will be rooted in values. So आपने describe किया, and also tell who are the key exponents, and perhaps if they work, for example, if I say Plato, I will talk about the Republic, yes or no? So it is extensively seen in his works, right? Even in the sense, I also see this in the works of Hegel. So यहाँ पे I have explained what the theory is, I have explained what the key components, उसको मैंने describe किया. What is this approach about? In fact, this approach also talks about the complementarity of ethics and politics. Plato sees a continuity between them, right? But at the same time, you should also have a criticism. Now the criticism can be twofold depending on how much space you have. Criticism कौन करेगा इसका? Philosophical approach is criticized even by, for example, like Machiavelli. Okay, he is also a huge critic, even also criticized by people like Marx. And overall, the philosophical approaches are also criticized by the behavioralists, right? Because they say these are value loaded. These are not neutral, these are not verifiable. They cannot give answers to the current phenomena. In fact, the very first lecture that is on YouTube of the crash course of theory, we have discussed, the very first topic we have discussed is this. So this question, we should have been able to answer it, but yes, the challenge is to write it in 10 marks. I am sure you would have more content. In सब चीजों को address करते हुए, and finally, of course, you should have a conclusion. Right? So 10 markers में, if you overemphasize the body, इसको miss करोगे criticism, it is also, you have to economize on that as well. Right? So this is the very first question. I think this is a very doable question. A question on normative approach has also been asked. A question of behavioral approach has also been asked. So this, I think, is a doable question. We can also do that, right? That is the very first question, the philosophical approach to study of political theory. Now, this is an interesting question. Now, the first part of the question has already been asked. In fact, if you remember our lectures on the crash course, we have done a detailed write-up on this, right? The relationship between equality and liberty. If I ask you, agar question se itna hota, relationship between equality and liberty, in one word, what is the answer? the relationship is very contested. Sometimes liberty takes precedence, sometimes equality takes precedence. For liberal, what takes precedence? Liberty. For socialists, equality is more important. So ultimately we see the rise of, let's say, the egalitarians like John Rawls, who wants to put everything together. Yes or no? So here, that is the first part, but you have to answer this from a multicultural perspective. Now both things separately we cover. Where do we cover multiculturalists? Rights में पढ़ते हैं और भी जगह पढ़ते हैं. Any prominent multiculturalist that you remember? Good. Will Kimlicka. We also cover Bhikhu Parekh. Yes or no? Do you remember anything from them? The moment you recall what they suggest, you get your answer. What does Kimlicka suggests? Special rights for minorities, and through that he will try to bring the bridge between equality and liberty, right? So in this question, we know that the relationship between liberty and equality is always contested. If you give too much of liberty, it is at the cost of equality, number one, right? So this relationship, first part has already been asked as a PYQ, and even individual question on multicultural perspective has been asked. Here the challenge is to integrate both of them and write a cohesive answer, right? So here, while you have to talk about the moment in the introduction, either you talk about the relationship between these two values are contested, or you can make this question also from a multicultural sense, that you define how multiculturalism aims to resolve the difference or the challenges between equality and liberty. That is how you can introduce the question. In the body of the question, we have to talk about how, through the works of Kimlicka or even Bhikhu Parekh, this tussle between equality and liberty is seemed to be managed. Okay? So यहाँ पे there is a chance that is why if we are giving special representation rights, minority rights, okay, so that means these are created or given to equalize the differences. And why is that? Because multicultural perspective is critical of the existing liberal perspective. Liberal perspectives goes for too much of homogenization, right? It does not give actual recognition to other rights. And when I say other rights, the rights also of minorities. Jaise Isaiah Berlin, what does he talk about? Value, pluralism. But even that is not able to accommodate the diversity. So the relationship between equality and liberty from this multicultural perspective will include these works. Any difference between the work of Bhikhu Parekh and Kimlicka? What was that? Right? Correct. And in fact, Bhikhu Parekh gives us a post-colonial perspective of multicultural perspective. So he will try to even sometimes criticize the work of Kimlicka, and he will make it more attuned. In fact, Bhikhu Kimlicka has a very famous line, the dialogue among civilizations. And if we have more multi-dialogic societies, more dialogue is there, you can dissolve the differences between equality and liberty. You cannot choose both, right? इस question में अगर आप चाहो तो Isaiah Berlin भी ला सकते हो, just as a, let's say, bridge point, because Isaiah Berlin says you cannot have only one single value which is going to be the most prominent value. You have to choose between them. Okay, so the question has a proper sentiment. You can give examples, but because the question also says देखो examples, of course that will be helpful, है ना? But because the question also says multicultural perspective, so it would have added some relevance if you quote the scholars as well. And normally we talk about these people. These are very prominent persons. In case you do not remember them, and in case even if you want to add even some of the, let's say, communitarians, आप उनको भी लिख सकते हो, because on this ground the communitarians also have the same concern. So I hope this is making sense, Rohan. ठीक है? So this is one. So both things individually you have seen, but to write that properly in this requires some, let's say, activity on your part. Now, question number 3 is explain Macpherson's view on power. Now, this exact question, Macpherson's view on democracy, was asked by UPSC in 2018 mains. तब क्या था view? Democracy पे. We generally read CB Macpherson's view on democracy, right? What does he talk about? Which power does he talk about? By the way, Macpherson is critical of both developing societies and even developed societies, and he also talks about that even the developed societies, okay, have not fully instrumentalized, or let's say fully embraced democracy, and which is why he also talks about two terms, extractive power and developmental power. Of course, he also talks about other sources of power, but these two are important in his regard. Normally, when you read power, आप कैसे पढ़ते हो power को? You read about elitist theory of power, you read about Hannah Arendt's theory of power, you read about, let's say, Michel Foucault's theory of power, Mosca, that is the elitist perspective, etc. We read about Robert Dahl, polyarchy, etc. यहाँ पे Macpherson is actually critiquing what? Democracies. This topic, actually, his view is predominantly on democracy, but the idea of power is related to that. And basically, he's saying that mostly it is the extractive power. If there is extractive power, that is not leading to development of people, as simple as that. What do we want? Developmental power, more and more. People should be empowered. And when I say development power, then the view is closer to the view of Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt gives a constructivist approach, a more constructive use. Otherwise, power is seen only in terms of domination. Yes or no? Right? So, इस question में जो भी पढ़ रहा है, अगर आपने let's say power में नहीं पढ़ा है, you would have seen this in democracy. And that is how we can answer this question. And of course, there is a direct PYQ also. So if somebody has also seen the PYQ, so this is not something that is unheard of. Now, my takeaway for you in this question, at least on power, is whenever you do power, do it in a proper power के लिए mind map जरूर बनाओ, and right from elitist theory of power. We've also done that in the class also, in our crash course also. All the theories of power that are there, we should know, which means power has changed. Power, which was purely an instrument of domination, an instrument of coercion, has become what? Power as an instrument of attraction. Right? Now, just for your reference, can you tell me what are, of course, there is elitist theory of power, other theories of power? Liberals have their own, Marxists have their own, pluralists have their own. Example of pluralist theory of power? The example of polyarchy, right? But the two standing out features which overlaps with WPT, one is Gramsci. So Gramsci changes the entire perspective the moment he brings hegemony. And of course you have Hannah Arendt, and followed by you have the postmodern perspective on power. Agar मैं change कर दूं postmodern perspective, then again it's a new question. So you have to talk about the Foucault's notion of power, right? So these can be the emerging themes that can be asked. तो या तो आपसे ये पूछेगा, इससे भी tough question अगर बनेगा, वो बनेगा compare कराएगा. One question UPSC had already asked, the difference between domination and hegemony. That's a very good question to understand. A similar question can now be made. For example, if I compare two perspectives on power. Let's say the last question is, they have compared liberal and Marxist perspective on state. So when you see the questions, ऐसा नहीं है कि आपने सिर्फ power में ये पढ़ लिया और your job is done. नहीं. You have to go beyond that. ठीक है? चलो आ जाओ, आप बहुत बार पूछ रहे थे क्लास के टाइमिंग. रेन भी हो रही, चलो आराम से बैठ जाओ, प्लीज हैव अ सीट. किसमें किसमें? अच्छा, और वो कल का था, आज एक्चुअली चेंज हो गया. ओके ओके ओके, प्लीज बैठ जाओ, प्लीज प्लीज हैव अ सीट. ओके, नाउ आई होप वी क्लियर ऑन दिस. ठीक, आते हैं नेक्स्ट पे. ये सवाल है फैसिज्म पे. हैव क्वेश्चंस बीन आस्क्ड ऑन फैसिज्म? यस, and generally the questions are quote based. Okay, so here the questions can also be, for example, a very famous quote of Mussolini was asked: nothing above the state, nothing beyond the state, and nothing against the state. Mussolini का direct question आ चुका है PPYQ पे. Okay, but this question is a comparative question. The moment we see a comparative question, that means you have to also see, for example, here if I were to Italian, of course here Mussolini, German क्या हो जाएंगे? Right? Now both of them have a difference. For example, their philosophy. Of course, एक तो place is different that we see. The people, leaders are different here, right? This has a very specific focus also on race, right? Nazism is even better, which again there is a hate for the Jews, ultimately led to extermination of Jews, right? Nazism, main point you'll also sell, this is also highly race oriented. Whereas if I say Italian Mussolini, this is ultra nationalistic in nature. Not that कि German नहीं थे, but यहाँ पे core focus is nationalism. Even Hitler also talks about a Lebensraum, okay, that the people are there, but here focus is also racial in nature, right? Then in the economic sense they also differ, right? One talks about autarky and one talks about corporatism, right? So economically also they have different views on how this is going to be happening. Right? And then when you compare, these are the points which are different, but of course there are points that are same. So whenever the question is even in difference, starting में क्या बताओगे, what are similar, and overall what is the difference? The brand of leaders is different, their core points, this is purely nationalistic, it is also nationalistic but rooted in race, right? And the idea of creating a Lebensraum, okay, I may not be pronouncing it very correctly, it's a German word, Lebensraum or something, Lebensraum, okay. And the economic sense also they differ, okay. By corporatism even the other elements can bring in. Here it basically was more related with respect to self-sufficiency, autarky, right? Now the questions still now on fascism have been one quote based. Ab aa gaya difference. Third type of question on fascism will be a question that we've also done in the class. This is also mentioned. Andrew Haywood का जो आप last chapter पढ़ोगे, हाँ, yes, that is the part. एक क्वेश्चन है, सिंपल क्वेश्चन है, आप लोग सोचिएगा इस पे. Is fascism dead? Very simple question. Is fascism dead? One. Second, can fascism be reborn in the 21st century? A similar question we also cover in the case of ideologies. Ideology में पढ़ते हैं, is socialism dead? What is the relevance of socialism in 21st century? A same question can also be there on fascism. Perhaps that can be a new question for 2026. So ideologies में one direct question we are getting from fascism. Okay. Next, what is the Marxist and the liberal approach towards the state? Okay. Again अपना जो theories of state वाला lecture है, उस पे भी हमने बहुत अच्छे से कर रखा है. For PSI 300 people also, you have seen this also. Direct question है आपके भी, right? Test में भी आपने लिखा भी होगा इस पे. And on what grounds the theoretical differences between them are promised? Explain. Okay. Again, please remember this is a 10 marker. You have to again, you cannot go too much into what is. अच्छा अच्छा कौन सा है? Have I missed any question? अच्छा अच्छा ठीक है. Thank you for pointing out. I think is it here or is it not there? अच्छा नहीं है तो ठीक है. Okay. अच्छा this is 1D. 1E is. हाँ ठीक है okay. So I'll just add it. Just give me a second. I'll also add it. Okay. Let's say the elitist elite theory of okay. Elitist theory of power we also do, and we've also done this. This is also direct topic. Whenever we read democracy, okay, we also do this. So how will we structure this? कैसे करोगे? हाँ. Rohan, I'll also explain this question, how to prepare questions which talks about comparison. Or comparison पहली बार नहीं आ रहे. When I go to the Marxist वाला question, I'll tell you previously also some questions have been asked. हाँ. Right, correct. So elitist theory of democracy, देखो, what is democracy basically? It is the empowerment of people. Okay. Elitist theory of democracy is that the empowerment of people is simply an illusion. The real power does not lie with the people. And many people, in fact, the Marxist view also talks about that ultimately the power is captured by the bourgeois. And state is ultimately an instrument of the bourgeois in this case. So elitist theory of democracy. So here also simple framework हमारा क्या होगा? We will tell, you can just define what is democracy and directly come to the theory. Okay, so you define what is the elitist theory talking about. The elitist capture, for example, who are its key exponents and how they exponents जरूर अपने को बताने पड़ेंगे. So the examiner gets to know that I know the topic properly, right? Other than that, I'll also then tell why is this theory overall criticized, what is the criticism here, and overall we'll also conclude. Elitist theory of power also exists. Who are the exponents of that? Pareto, Moscow also, which also tells the power only lies with, let's say, the oligarchs, or there is a power that is concentrated. Okay. Now in this question, elitist theory, main आपको elaboration है, ये आपको यहाँ पे marks मिलेंगे. But the structure has to be followed, that how democracy, which fundamentally talks about how everybody should be empowered, ultimately power resides only in the case with elites only, right? That is what we will explain in this part. Okay? That is one. Now, these are the first 5 questions, right? Now, if you go back to your syllabus, if we were to map this abhi tak, so we have seen one question on fascism, one question here. Okay, theories of state, so I think iske baad wala hai. In power, what they've actually asked you is again a reflection of a question that you see. So power bhi pucha ja chuka hai aapse. Democracy, there is a question that is asked. Okay, so overall what we see here, that there is a fair representation of questions in this paper so far. Nothing is very unusual, okay, that has been asked. In fact, one question on equality that is asked. So equality and its debate is also a topic, जैसे लिखा भी relationship, for example, इसको उन्होंने पूछा है multicultural perspective पे, right? The relationship between equality and freedom is asked from the multicultural perspective. Yes or no? Which is something again more contemporary in nature, right? So compulsory section में people should not have some such issues. Now if we go back to the other blocks, now we'll have a look at. अच्छा, again if there's any question which is missing, आप बताना मुझे, ठीक है? By chance if there's a slide that is missing. Now, what is the Marxist and liberal approach towards state? See, I'll tell you many comparative questions have been asked in the past. पहला ऐसे एक सवाल है जो थोड़ी मुश्किल होगा. If I compare justice of Ambedkar with justice of Rawls, one question. I can also compare theory of justice of Plato and Aristotle. Plato and Rawls, can I compare that? Yes or no? Similarly, can I also, there's a question on compare liberal feminism and radical feminism. Can this also be asked? आप सोचो ना. तो देखो पहला क्या होता है, when the questions are created, if a question is simple, it will ask you to define, elaborate, comment. This is one level of question. The higher level of analytical understanding is when the question has compare. These questions will not be कोई भी question. अगर मैं आपसे पूछूं radical feminism, personalist political, आप अच्छे से लिख लोगे. The moment I change the question, Marxist feminism versus radical, अब थोड़ा सा लगेगा कहाँ से compare करें. So when the question is on comparison, your mind should be clear, भाई, what are the parameters on which I will compare anything. And comparison, and these kind of questions are now increasing, right? So which is why even if somebody has to ask you on state, अगर मुझे आपसे question फिर से नया बनाना हो, I will also compare with you how is neoliberal theory different from, let's say, positive liberals. वो भी comparison हो गया. Yes or no? Now in this question, because this is a 20 marker, now you have space. You can also tell what is a state, right? You can introduce a state and then directly go into both of them, Marxist and liberal approach towards the state. What is the liberal approach to state? सबसे पहले कीवर्ड क्या है? State is a neutral arbiter, right? But Marxists directly criticize that. What is for them? Is the state neutral in or not? Right? And the moment you say instrument, even in Marxist view, there are two things. Yes, so there is an instrumentalist approach. State direct instrument हो सकता है. वो कौन बोलता है? Even Ralph Miliband. And the second is relative autonomy approach. That most of the times state is autonomous. However, in the times of crisis, what would happen? State अपनी असली, the true character of the state will be shown, and it will ultimately be a supporter of the class या bourgeois interest, right or no? Whereas when I talk about the liberal approach, first is of course the state is a neutral arbiter. In classical or neoliberal sense, the state is also a enabler. For example, state is enabler. State has no business doing business. State will not go into redistribution. Yes or no? But in Marxism, state has to go for redistribution. State has to ensure social justice. State will do मार्क्सिस्ट के केस में प्रोग्रेसिव टैक्सेशन, हाँ है ना. तो द रोल ऑफ द स्टेट एंड द नेचर ऑफ द स्टेट इज वेरी डिफरेंट फॉर बोथ ऑफ देम, लिबरल एंड ऑल्सो मार्क्सिस्ट. नाउ सो व्हेन यू डिफाइन स्टेट एंड देन पैराग्राफ बाय पैराग्राफ यू कैन कंपेयर हाउ दे आर डिफरेंट. नेचर की बात कर सकते हो, इनके रोल की बात कर सकते हो, फंक्शंस, रीडिस्ट्रीब्यूशन एक्सेट्रा, फॉर ईच ऑफ देम यू कैन मेंशन. एंड व्हाइल डूइंग सो यू कैन ऑल्सो मेंशन सम प्रोमिनेंट पर्सन्स. जैसे जब आप बात करोगे इंस्ट्रूमेंटलिस्ट नेचर, सो मार्क्स in his initial work, the Communist Manifesto also, he spoke about the instrumentalist nature. But in the later societies, the capitalist or the post-capitalist societies, the same view is done by Ralph Miliband, okay? Or similar view, for example, we also go into, if you understand the post-colonial societies. In post-colonial societies, you have a view of Hamza Alawi, the overdeveloped state. Overdeveloped state भी क्या है? This is a state which has a very strong political sense, but it has not developed very much in the economic or the social sense. Yes or no? तो grounds क्या है, कैसे differences आ रहे हैं, आराम से आप सोच सकते हो. But these are the questions that will test your how well you have understood the concept. Otherwise हम लोग ज़्यादातर एक ही point को आप elaborate करते रह जाओगे. That would not serve much. So now when you do, जब भी आप देखो, इसीलिए view, let's say read WPT में पढ़ते हो Locke. Locke is the father of liberalism. Post Locke you read Marx. पहली बार आप वहां पढ़ते हो. Second time you read them in theories of state and you also read them in ideologies. So I have often asked my students that don't read these things in isolation. फिर से if you go to the syllabus you have Mill, Marx, etc. So पहला first point is here. Second is in ideologies you have liberalism, socialism, Marxism, and third is theories of state also where this gets reflected. If you are thorough in these three, these kind of questions would not be difficult. And please do not do them in isolation. अगर ideology कर रहे हैं हम, liberalism as an ideology, it also means, it also talks about what is the state doing in that. Yes or no? So such questions will be easily solved if you are thorough with these topics. तो इतना मुश्किल नहीं होगा. But अब क्या है? अब new kind of question can be, for example, this they have asked you. अभी उन्होंने क्या पूछा आपको? इसको और इसको compare कर दिया, ठीक? क्या वो इसको कंपेयर कर सकते हैं? बिल्कुल कर सकते हैं, राइट? कैन दे कंपेयर लिबरल्स एंड प्लूरलिस्ट? आप वो सोचो. पोस्ट कोलोनियल स्टेट्स कैन बी कंपेयर्ड. फेमिनिस्ट लिख लिया. अब विद इन फेमिनिस्ट दे हैव आल्सो कंपेयर्ड radical feminism versus liberal. Of course that can also be in this. So again a small homework what we will do, in fact we'll also discuss in आज the 300 वाली क्लास में भी. आप सिंपल सी इसके लिए टेबल बनाओ एक. The best way is make a table and on certain grounds make the comparison on what the state is. चलो let's do it one by one. एक लाइन तो at least देखते हैं. What is a liberal state in one or two lines? Neutral arbiter. It can be night watchman. Yes or no? What is a neoliberal state? नहीं है. It is against. It is not. It is very close to what I just said. Okay. So here minimal state है, enabling state है. Again Thatcherism, Reaganism, Washington consensus, वो सब याद आ रहा है अपने को. What is a Marxist state? Is instrumentalist or relative autonomy, etc. What is a pluralist state? So here there will be multiple actors. Initially think of polyarchy, Robert Dahl, but even Robert Dahl changed his view. He talked about deformed polyarchy, okay? In, let's say, when he was criticizing C. Wright Mill's view. Post-colonial state की definition क्या होगी? What are the core points of post-colonial state? Good, good. And Eurocentric theories are also there to analyze it. Those theories are never a good reflection of how good the state is. First issue. Second, post-colonial state is having prismatic. It can be good. Soft state किसने बोला? Gunnar Middle. Okay. Prismatic societies. In that, direct application of Eurocentric theory will not be the best entity. Okay. Feminist theory of state. In one line, let's say. Good. और सोचो. Good. When I look at the scale, it appears male to me. Yes. Masculinist view. And sometimes their theory is also said to be ambivalent. Right? They criticize the state but also expect the state to make the changes and relevant accommodations. Okay? Fair point. So, इसके लिए after you are done with this topic fairly well, make one table उसको summarize करने के लिए. ये कभी नहीं भूलोगे. अब टेबल कैसे बननी चाहिए? नेचर ऑफ स्टेट, key exponents, their work, criticism, conclusion. हर एक theory को criticize किया गया है. There is no single theory that has not been criticized. Why are post-colonial states criticized? हमने करा है बहुत डिटेल में वैसे. Very good. Internal problems are not discussed. They think everything is a colonial export. Anything else? Good. Right. And one more thing is, while they criticized the European theories, but they adopt their best models also. So that is also fine. ठीक है. Are you able to get the hang of it? Best way will be इसको एक टेबल में summarize करोगे लास्ट में. That will help you. तो ना thinkers की प्रॉब्लम आएगी and that will be a good point of our comparison. ठीक है. तो देखो यहाँ पे not only are we discussing how to solve a question, but future questions कैसे बनेंगे, ऐसे questions हैं. If the examiner has to make the paper difficult, what they will do? Question comparison के ज़्यादा डालेगा आपसे. And many times हम silos में पढ़ते हैं. Justice एक बार पढ़ा तो पढ़ लिया. Justice में सिर्फ Rawls पढ़ा, काम खत्म. But point is, वो Rawls को अम्बेडकर से compare कर देंगे, Rawls को गांधी से. Rawls can be compared to Plato. So these connections can always be there. So when you're done with these topics, open up your mind, you can brainstorm, that should help. 300 वाले में भी you will see a lot of questions which I am putting in. Will stretch your mind. तो काफी क्वेश्चन में समझने में अच्छा लगेगा. चलो ठीक है, that is one. Direct question from theories of state, I can say that. Okay. Karl Popper presents a defense of the open society against its enemies. Elaborate. I think this is 2B. एक बार चेक कर लेना ना, because I have not written that, तो शायद कहीं मिस ना हो जाए कोई. Okay. Whenever we read what? Plato. The criticism of Plato is done by Karl Popper. Okay. Karl Popper not only say in his book Open Society and Its Enemies, Karl Popper also says that Plato is also one of the forerunners of totalitarianism. And Karl Popper is a interwar intellectual and he tries to examine. है ना? So this question, whosoever has read Plato well, okay, would have been able to do so. In fact, Karl Popper, we also see Karl Popper also criticizing Karl Marx. Right? In this question, the question is also very, in fact, in the foundation class, या कोई भी class हो वैसे भी आप पढ़ोगे, ये पढ़ते हो आप. So this is not a difficult question, but main thing is how to structure it. So here you can talk about something either about Karl Popper or you can also start with open societies. And Karl Popper talks about certain keywords. What is the attribute of an open society? Very good, right? An open society is open to falsification. Falsification means whatever I say, you can counter me, it can be wrong. Whatever you say can also be wrong. That means ideas can be discussed, which ultimately lead to truth. And there is no single final truth. Constant debate has to happen. Now, Plato also supports dialectics. But the problem is the philosopher king is above law, philosopher king is above everybody else. So ये एक dichotomy है that while Plato supports dialectics, the influence of Socrates is directly visible here, but in Plato, in his society, there is excessive unity. There is too much of uniformism, conformism. People, the individual is sacrificed for the state, the philosopher king, so no question can be done. So that is why it becomes a closed society. Right? So his work on Plato, his work on Marx also talks about how it is not open to falsification, right? How is a very closed, hierarchical, regimented societies. Plato also talks about men of courage, men of reason, men of appetite. Right? एक rigidity है, एक closed system है. In the closed system, other ideas cannot come together. Right? So all these points, that is why he presents a defense of open societies, and according to Karl Popper, if the ideas, the exchange of ideas in the open societies, all of that is open, then only we can talk about this element. No, Karl Popper is actually having a commentary on these thinkers of WPT, है ना? So if you have done this part, पढ़ा भी होगा most probably आपने, then this can be answered. So you don't have to specifically do that. बहुत बार होता है ना, 4-5 साल में एक बार appear करने वाला. And this exact question has been asked, if I'm not wrong, in 2015 or 2016. In that same question was that open society and its enemies dash Karl Popper 10 या 15 marks में आ चुका है. Okay? So you have to talk about what is an open society, on what grounds Plato's philosopher king does, or the Plato's republic, they does not have it, and similarly other strands it talks about. So Karl Popper work can also be understood और it helps in understanding other totalitarian regimes. तो वो प्लेटो को तो करता ही है, but he says Plato is the first one of who's to do so. And because he's an inter-war intellectual, so he also wants to examine totalitarianism, fascism, etc., etc. So his theory goes beyond that. That ultimately it is closed societies who do this. Okay. In fact, his view will also come very close to the view of Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt also makes the same claim. If the people are not acting in concert, what will happen? The rise of totalitarian leaders and totalitarian regimes will start. Right? तो इसीलिए जो भी क्वेश्चन है इसमें कभी भी आप ये मत सोचो एक ही तरह का आंसर होगा. हो सकता है आई कैन ब्रिंग सम अदर थिंकर देयर आइडियाज इफ दे आर मैचिंग. राइट. सो वन वेरी गुड थिंग अबाउट योर ऑप्शनल इज दैट देयर इज ऑलवेज अ स्कोप. एक कहीं किसी क्वेश्चन में क्रॉस पॉलिनेशन भी टर्म यूज हुआ है. देयर इज ऑलवेज अ स्कोप फॉर क्रॉस पॉलिनेशन. Right? Something that you read in some other part can be linked to another area. Right? So this is how this question could have been done. Okay. This is 2C. Just you keep on telling me, right? Explain how 2C, right? Rawls has used the liberal and the egalitarian perspective to develop his theory of justice. क्या Rawls पे सवाल आए हैं पहले? Yes. Questions have been like Rawls theory is both procedural and contractual. This question says it has liberal and egalitarian perspective. Now, just tell me the essence of the meaning of liberal here and egalitarian here. If you explain that, answer बन जाएगा आपका. कार्तिक, हाँ. Very good. नहीं. लेक्सिकल में सबसे ऊपर क्या है? लेक्सिकल में सबसे ऊपर क्या है? मैक्सिमम लिबर्टी है. Yes. तो लिबर्टी आ गया तो सबसे पहले क्या हो गया? लिबरल. So and what is the challenge for Rawls? Okay, challenge for Rawls is, in fact in the first test also we have seen this question, that Rawls के लिए challenge क्या है? He has to balance liberty as well as equality. So he gives primacy to liberty. In his lexical order, number 1 क्या है? Maximum liberty है. But he also has to follow up. अब egalitarian कैसे करेगा? How does he ensure social justice? By he is influenced by Kant, right? He is also, so yes, he will also talk about a difference principle. That inequality can only be justified if it helps in, yes, if it helps in justifying or improvement of the least advantaged or most disadvantaged people. This is his view. ठीक, अब has used the perspective. It's a 15 marker. You will also tell how does he do it. So all the keywords that you read, right? That he proposes that in a veil of ignorance, under original position, man as a rational actor who's not aware about whether he's a man or a woman or their own predisposition, and he tries to create a grand universal theory. Often it is said, just like truth is the first virtue of any social thought, justice is the first virtue of a social institution. So for Rawls, justice is the most important thing, just like justice is the most important concern for Plato. तो इस क्वेश्चन में ये टेक्निकली यही चीज है. अगर आपको ये पता होता है, एक और सवाल पहले आ चुका था, दैट क्वेश्चन वाज हाउ रॉल्स थ्योरी इज प्रोसीजरल इन नेचर प्लस ऑल्सो इट इज कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअल. I again have to talk about this part only, because Rawls focuses that just procedures will lead to just outcomes. Yes or no? So I think this question could be answered. Rawls, acha, one more thing. Last year we also saw that when we discussed, last year there was no question on Rawls. Right? There's a question. Normally you will get one question on Rawls. Last year could have been an aberration, right? So this is also one thing that you get to know and understand. Okay. Egalitarian perspective. अब इस क्वेश्चन में भी you have to have the name of his book, A Theory of Justice. Proper keywords होने चाहिए अपने पास. Procedural है, ठीक है. जैसे for example, original position, veil of ignorance, lexical order, जो भी keywords हमने पढ़े हैं. That is how the influences on Rawls. In this question, would you criticize Rawls also? Yes, last में. And best critique, अगर आपके पास space नहीं है, best critique किसका? वो communitarians का. क्यों? That is mentioned in our syllabus. सिलेबस में क्या लिखा है? रॉल्स जस्टिस विद रेफरेंस टू कम्युनिटेरियन क्रिटिक. चाहे आप माइकल सैंडल की बात करो, माइकल वॉल्जर की बात करो, एंड करो उसके बाद. यस, तो रॉल्स में दिस इज देयर. अ टफर क्वेश्चन ऑन रॉल्स वुड बी द कंपैरिजन ऑफ, इसमें भी कंपैरिजन आएगा. अब इफ आई कंपेयर रॉल्स विद डॉर्किन, नेक्स्ट लेवल ऑफ क्वेश्चन है. इफ आई कंपेयर रॉल्स विद अमर्त्य सेन, नेक्स्ट टाइप ऑफ क्वेश्चन है. इफ आई कंपेयर रॉल्स थ्योरी ऑफ जस्टिस, You can write some of these points. 3 questions I'm asking you to prepare. 1 is Rawls versus Dworkin, Rawls versus Sane, and third question, this has been asked alag se, I'm combining both of them, Rawls theory of justice versus Nozick's entitlement theory of justice. These will be the tougher questions. Why? These are more comparative in nature. Other than that, अगर question descriptive है, Nozick's, N-O-Z-I-C-K-S, Nozick's entitlement, ये अलग से आ चुका है सवाल. What is entitlement theory of Nozick? This also we have covered in our class. But I am asking you to make a comparison. So here also, when you do Rawls, when you're done with Rawls, एक आपको मैं advice दूंगा. This is what you can do. Let's say you take justice as the theme. ठीक? What is justice for Plato? That means Greek perspective है. Greek perspective में 2 हमेशा तैयार करो. Aristotle. ठीक? This is the Greek perspective. IPT अगर है Indian political thought, overall, let's say Manusmriti, what does that talk about justice? Even Arthashastra, just know the crux of it. These will be the new type of questions if the examiner has to ask you. Let's say IPT हो गया, Greek हो गया. उसके बाद within thinkers, for example. So Rawls तो हम कर ही रहे हैं, right? But Rawls, Dworkin, then Sen, Amartya Sen, and even Nozick. This is the contemporary debate. The only thing that is remaining that is not covered here perhaps is the Marxist perspective of justice. अब ये हो गया comparison के sense में. अगर आपने इसको भी prepare कर लिया, there is hardly any question that can be asked that we would not be able to answer. And IPT में, this is the older perspective. The newer perspective will be Gandhi, Ambedkar. Now UPSC has already asked the social justice. How does that differ between Gandhi and Ambedkar? And they've also asked you Rawls की justice and Ambedkar justice. What is remaining? Rawls versus Gandhi. अब यहाँ पे आपका दिमाग चलेगा, डायरेक्टली ये बुक्स में लिखा भी नहीं है, तो then you have to grapple with your mind कि यार ये होना कैसे चाहिए, how do we write this, right? So when you prepare, so from one paper, like for in prelims, what do? Not only do you see the answer, you also analyze the other 4 options. Here what you have to do, from that topic, what has not yet been asked. अगर question PYQ direct आएगा, वो तो हम कर लेंगे ना, that we will prepare. But what can be an expected question? That is a smart way. So the people who are watching this and who are here, you now have to prepare and look at the longer, the bigger picture that is in front of you. Okay? And do this if you have any issues, and when you do this homework kind of, you can also show it to me. You can ask any perspective if you want. Now, फिर से question क्या है? Just see the keyword comparative. This is 3A, है ना? Okay. Provide a comparative analysis of behavioral and institutional approach to the study of political theory. Okay. Now again, when we cover political theory, we cover various approaches. Okay. And you have to compare both these approaches. So just in one essence, what are these institutional approaches? By the way, this question can also be done better when you've covered your comparative politics. वहाँ पे भी same चीज पढ़ते हो आप approaches में, right? What is an institutional approach? Have you heard about legal institutional approach? Legal is what? Constitution. What is institutional approach? Specific, right? Any such institution, how does that impact, and how can we then understand the theory? Okay. And there have been certain experts who have again analyzed this institutional approach, etc. हम क्या देख रहे हैं? We've seen the comparative aspects of both behavioral approach. Who is the person prominent with behavioral approach? David Easton, right? Would David Easton criticize the institutional approach? नहीं, वैसे अगर if they were to, on what grounds? आपसे theories हो सकती है, बिल्कुल, not connected to reality, again not verifiable, right? Second, institutional approach is not holistic, it is not interdisciplinary, it does not include everything, yes or no? So in the comparative sense, I can talk about it. In fact, in later, जब इस question को end करेंगे, that even behavioralism did not answer every question. That is why what came? Post-behavioralism. तो जब when we read traditional approaches, even we talk about legal institutional approaches, तो ये जो question है, बहुत बार some people get comparative sense में. When you do political theory, you again cover it. When you do again comparative politics, this again gets covered. Okay. So the point is, even institutional approaches, while can explain the working of institutions, and again एक चीज सोचो, I'm making a again connection. institutional approaches, institutions हो गए अपने, जैसे parliament let's say is one institution, okay, judiciary is one institution. Institution has its own power. The people who are in the institution, which means the actors, even they are also important. Actor is also important, institution is also important, and the text from which the institution gets the power, it is also important. So again, a unidimensional analysis can never be holistic in nature. Yes or no? And second, in the institutional analysis, you have to have it multidisciplinary also. So I can make a comparative analysis of both of these approaches, okay? And then we can understand, and overall you can also mention at the end the challenges with these approaches also, right? So that is also one major thing to talk about. Okay. Mahatma Gandhi and state. Now, Mahatma Gandhi वाला question तो paper 1B में आना चाहिए. Is this correct or incorrect? Yes. So political ideologies में you also have Gandhism. Okay. Right. Even IPT में you have Gandhi. So this question can be from both. Now when you say state does the greatest harm to mankind by destroying individuality, etc., which lies at the root of all progress, what is the essence of this question? And Gandhi is a moral anarchist, this you also know, inspired by the works of Tolstoy. Okay. Should we give less time? Actually, if the question is, if you get 3 questions, then also your point will change. Okay, so one should ideally, when we have proper time, we should cover all these topics. तो ऐसा नहीं अगर IPT से सिर्फ गांधी जी पे सवाल आ रहा है तो अगली बार छोड़ के जाएंगे. हो सकता है अगली बार एक सवाल बुद्धिस्ट पॉलिटिकल थॉट पे 20 मार्कर आ जाए, 2 10 मार्कर्स आ जाए. You don't know. Okay, that is always what the examiner has. Okay, the examiner can always trick you. आप जो कम prepare करके गए होगे, let's say if they ask you more. So why be at a disadvantage when we can prepare well, right? That's the point now. Okay. So the question says that the state does the greatest harm to mankind by destroying individuality, right? So just core concern याद रखेंगे. Gandhi ultimately is a अब देखो वो क्या बात कर रहे हैं. तो ultimately Gandhi's utopia, his Ram Rajya was a stateless society. In this, he talks about democratic decentralization, oceanic circles of power. Ultimate power has to be with the people, which is why he is always talking about how people can be empowered. Agar state aayega, then the role of the people gets diminished. That is his main concern, right? So this also is a concern that he talks about. So you will talk about why does he talk about a stateless society? Okay, his views, ultimately he talks about individual, you can link later on Article 40, etc. Panchayati Raj, etc. owes to his idea. But also remember, whenever there is a question on Gandhi, you can always compare his views with Marx. Now Karl Marx supports a stateless society, yes or no? So we'll see that yes, there is a comparison, there is a similarity in Marx. Marx ka utopia, what is that? Communism. Communism is a stateless society. But what is the difference between Gandhi and Marx? Similarity to hai, but difference क्या? Similarity, both of them. See, for Karl Marx, the state is the instrument of exploitation. State is the instrument of bourgeois class. But what is the case with Gandhi? How are they different? और सोचो. Yes, main thing is method. Gandhi does not support violence, number one. And Gandhi says continuity should be there between means and ends. Karl Marx simply says that ends are more important. What is the end? Equality. Uske liye, even if there is a violent overthrow, if there is bloodshed, even that is okay. Which is why Marx also says when a class in itself becomes a class for itself, then only the true exploitation would end. So 2 differences are there. While both of them support a stateless society, one difference is means and ends. Second is violence. These are the 2 differences. So again, overall, through a comparative sense, आप लिख सकते हो उस पूरे क्वेश्चन को. दूसरा देखो, इस क्वेश्चन ऐसा नहीं है कि it is mandatory to write Marx, but you can even bring Ambedkar here. You can bring Ambedkar has a constitutionalist approach, right? Whereas Gandhi has a approach which emphasizes more on a stateless society. Gandhi के लिए the state can be an oppressor, but for Ambedkar, Ambedkar focuses on a constitutionalist approach. So my point is, in a question, if you compare, if you contrast, if you criticize, it adds more value. ये जरूर हम याद रखेंगे, है ना? And again, through questions, through answer writing, through some feedback, etc., you get better at this. I think this we can understand. Now, direct question. This question has been asked even previously. Personal is political. It was asked in a compulsory sense. Okay. And when that was asked, sometimes the student can make a mistake. They don't know this question exactly is from where part, which part. You know exactly where is personal is political. Which ideology? Feminism, radical feminism, more specifically, right? Who gave this term? Karl Popper, and again there was a broader interpretation given by. So Karl Popper has coined it, and of course Susan Moller-Okin through their works have given the 4 interpretations overall of this. Ab kya hai? It addresses the issue of personal is political. So directly this question is coming from the ideology of feminism, and more specifically radical feminism. Now when you explain radical feminism, इसमें समझाना पड़ेगा why is it radical? Why? Because liberal feminism, socialist feminism, it did not talk about personal is political. It simply talked about that in the public sphere, the women should get, for example, equality. Women should have a right to vote, suffrage rights. Socialists will talk about equality, better work, better pay. But radical feminism ने बोला कि भाई even the personal sphere is political. Even in personal sphere there is an attack. In the personal sphere there is also patriarchy. Outside also there is patriarchy. State is a manifestation of that patriarchy, and even in inside. That means even in the personal sphere, for example, we have domestic violence laws. Even many times the laws are against women. Yes or no? So that is why radical naam hi kyun hai? Why is that approach radical? Because it redefines the existing conception. It redefines how exploitation was. Okay, so that is to be mentioned here. Now one more thing, the people who are preparing also, when you see your notes or when you see the content, you see पता तो है चलो आपको radical है, क्या आप उसमें recall कर पा रहे हो, which thinkers to quote, etc. So this constant exercise should happen in your mind, right? If I am saying Susan Moller-Okin, do you remember it? Do you know the interpretations? If not, then you should revise that topic, as simple as that. क्योंकि अभी जो the people who have just given the mains, they would also agree that many a times if we have not revised well, अब आप सोचो back to back essay लिखना है, you have to write all the GS papers, इतना कुछ है दिमाग में, main problem becomes retrieval, which is always why the time that you spend from September to December, ये सारा time अगर आपने अच्छे से use किया है, अच्छे से notes बनाए हैं, जैसे some of you are already making it, and if you are in a habit of revising them, recall हमें वो होता है जो हमें long term memory में है ना? लास्ट में आप सोचो आप 2 महीने में कितना क्राइम करोगे, हो सकता है आप ठीक ठाक याद भी हो जाए, बट एग्जाम में कितना रिकॉल होगा, दैट इज ऑल्सो nobody can guarantee how much you can recall. Okay, so that is one. So I think this question can be answered from that front also. Okay, next question, I think you keep on telling me, this is 4A. Okay, the foundational base of Western democracy has been shaped by Locke's idea of constitutionalism, freedom and property. ये क्वेश्चन जैसे ही मैंने देखा, आई वॉज रिमाइंडेड अगेन ऑफ एन ईयर 2018 देयर वाज अ 20 मार्कर, फिर से 20 मार्कर आया है. द 20 मार्कर ऑन लॉक वाज, लॉक इज द फादर ऑफ लिबरलिज्म. सेम कंटेंट हमें यहां लिखना है, एग्जैक्ट सेम, बिकॉज अल्टीमेटली यू हैव टू टॉक अबाउट हिज आइडियाज ऑफ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनलिज्म, फ्रीडम एंड प्रॉपर्टी. Okay, just a couple of points, you tell me, what will you tell about constitutionalism? Anything that comes to mind? I think for 300 वाले, I think you have not done अभी है ना लॉक yet, कोई बात नहीं. Anything? आप तो बता सकते हो, you have already done it. हाँ, रिकॉल करो. गुड, चलो सोशल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट ठीक है. पवन, यू? देखो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनलिज्म है, राइट? सो हियर हिज आइडियाज, ओके, द सपोर्ट. सो राइट फ्रॉम किसमें किसमें? हाँ, सोशल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, यस. नहीं नहीं नहीं, वो अलग है, वो रॉल्स का है, दैट इज फॉर रॉल्स, राइट. हाँ, तो कॉन्स्टिट्यू, अच्छा, व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन एंड कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनलिज्म? इज्म में क्या अंतर है? and ultimately it is the ism is an ideology that ultimately we are following the ideals of the constitution, yes or no? So here in constitutionalism, how is that being supported? So we through various means, through a proper social contract, he will talk about in detail, right? He will also talk about ultimately a civil society. He also talks about separation of powers, etc., right? In fact, we read about Montesquieu and separation of powers, right? But we should also know this separation of powers, even Locke talks about, even before Montesquieu. Okay? When I say freedom, it simply means liberty, because his idea ultimately became the bulwark of liberalism. Okay? So here he also talks about a minimal state, he talks about a night watchman state. All these points we can talk about. And when I say property, in fact in freedom also, remember he spoke about natural rights, right? In property he spoke about, in fact he criticized Filmer's patriarcha. He criticized the divine theory of rights, and he says that people should have right to property. And this ultimately became the seeding grounds for the growth of capitalism. In fact, he is also criticized by Macpherson. Macpherson also says that he is a scholar of possessive individualism. तो इस क्वेश्चन में आपका काम क्यों आसान हो गया? 3 sections already बने हुए हैं. So based on them, you have many ideas you can easily put in through. If this question was merely, let's say, if the question was Locke is the father of liberalism, you have to structure your answer properly, right? यहाँ पे almost in these 3 heads I have to talk, elucidate, overall criticize at least the part that how ultimately Macpherson or perhaps a couple of other scholars criticized Locke, but ultimately Locke and Lockean ideas are the foundation of Western political philosophy, especially the modern Western political philosophy. Or how is he ultimately the father of liberalism? Okay? So I hope people online I have been able to follow this as well, right? So this is how we'll talk about. Now, Hannah Arendt has analyzed a few categories of vita activa. Okay? What is activa? It is not the activa that we, the scooty nahi hai. What is this vita activa? चलो Hannah Arendt जब हम पढ़ते हैं, देखो Hannah Arendt पे जो क्वेश्चंस बन सकते हैं, Hannah Arendt पे the one question of course can be banality of evil. Yes, सुना हमने banality of evil. चलो अभी आप करोगे, हो जाएगा तैयार, डोंट वरी. पवन आप तो पढ़ चुके हो, आप भी पढ़ चुके हो पीछे. Hannah Arendt पे other question is her theory of power that we just saw. Other question on Hannah Arendt can be her analysis of totalitarian regimes. Okay, then in 2019, if I'm not wrong with the year, चलो year भूल जाओ, नहीं तो एक क्वेश्चन आया था, UPSC had asked conceptual triad of and she uses terms like animal laboran, homo faber and zoon politikon. Of course, zoon politikon, Aristotle, we also see this. This is exactly what you have to write. Okay, she talks about vita activa and vita contemplativa. Contemplativa, contemplation means to think. Activa, activa means action, act. Yes or no? So in this question, we have to talk about these 3 things: labor, work and action. For Hannah Arendt, the true insan, a true meaning of a human is when they participate in the political sphere. And when they are acting in concert. If people are doing work, they are only animal laboran. In this case, they are only homo faber, right? But true point is action. And this is where her ideas are very close to Aristotle. In fact, I can again link, if people work, अब मैं फिर से ले आऊँगा Karl Popper को. If people take action, for her action means civic republicanism, participation in public affairs. अगर ये होता है, then it becomes an open society and this will prevent the rise of totalitarian regimes. So just that, not only do you have to explain this, try to link it with some other ideas and concepts. Okay? Haan, beta activa, broadly speaking, an action can be described in 3 elements. That is the different categories: labor, work and action. But वो है वो vita activa and contemplativa, that is how. So she is a thinker without barriers, etc. Right? Okay. This was 4B. Okay. Now we talk about 4C. Do you think legitimacy acquired by consent, important keyword, or manufactured by indoctrination is an essential element of maintenance of political rule? Justify your answers with relevant examples. Now this is a more applied question, right? Question है legitimacy. When you read about power, power में क्या क्या पढ़ते हैं? Power है, एक authority है, एक है legitimacy. What is legitimacy? It is power plus authority, right? And when we read legitimacy, one of the most important works on legitimacy is, let's say, by Max Weber. The three types of legitimacy, right? So here two things, if there is consent or if it is manufactured by indoctrination. तो यहाँ पे we are going into the roots of legitimacy. Okay, how can that be acquired? You can also quote the work of Max Weber here. But additionally, we have to go into detail, talking when I say consent, manufactured, etc. I will also have to bring in Gramsci, which also explains how some regimes, even Noam Chomsky, right? How some regimes, even though exploitative, even though elitist, how they're still able to hold on to power. Uski reason hai ye, that they are able to manufacture the consent of the people. They're able, and it can even be manufactured. For that, what do they need? Intellectuals. The role of intellectuals in that sense also. So then, the question says that whether this legitimacy acquired, is that an essential element of maintenance of political order? Is that essential? So here, you have to talk about legitimacy. If it is only acquired by consent, etc., it may not be. That may not lead to proper maintenance of political rule. Why? There can always be counter hegemony against it. There can also be counter intellectuals to talk against it. So which is also why for maintenance of long-term legitimacy, there has to be rule of law. There has to be free and fair elections. There has to be individual rights. So I can talk about various things. Yes or no? So question में जैसे आए ना, do you think? It becomes a reflective and evaluative question. Right? Legitimacy is question में you can also give some examples. जैसे Arab Spring is a very good example. Arab Spring we all often talk about. If there is a rise of authoritarian regimes, लोग क्या करते हैं? Revolt करते हैं. As seen in Arab Spring. So this was indoctrination. There was a lot of. We have also seen the same thing in Bangladesh. Fleeing away of Sheikh Hasina, right? So when the question says relevant example, तो पहले आप theoretically बताओ उसको, and then give supporting examples. Be it Arab Spring, there are very pro-democracy protests also. Many protests against authoritarian rulers. वो यहाँ पे example में आ जाएगा. Okay? Does that answer your doubt? Okay? Now, one more thing. अब हमने देख लिया इसको. अब let's go back to our syllabus. Fine. If you now see the syllabus, political theory, meaning and approaches. सवाल आया है? कौन-कौन सवाल आए हैं? Philosophical approach and चलो good. Behavioral and institutional. Okay. So there is a good representation here. Now, so you should know the meaning. पिछले साल क्वेश्चन मीनिंग पे भी आए थे. एक क्वेश्चन आया था, what is the meaning inherent in the term political? That was a very open-ended question that year. 20 marks में. ठीक है, सर भी चकरा जाएगा कि लिखना क्या है इसमें. We have also discussed that in the older video also. Now, approaches, फिर से prepare करो. What are traditional approaches? What are the modern approaches? Why behavioralism started? What is post-behavioralism? Very repeated question. At least this section gives you 30 marks. Okay. Theories of state, we have already seen questions. Be prepared for comparative nature of questions also, right? That is there. इसमें एक नहीं लिखा है, एक ब्रैकेट में एक और टर्म ऐड कर सकते हो, पोस्ट मॉडर्निस्ट थ्योरी ऑफ स्टेट. Okay, because when we do international relations, we also see the post-modernist theory of IR. Same question यहाँ भी बन सकता है, syllabus में नहीं है, हो सकता है they go beyond the syllabus also. There is no guarantee that they cannot. Justice, okay, conceptions of justice. क्या है? Special reference to Rawls. Did we see a question? Yes, communitarian critique. But now you will also prepare that whole comparative chart on justice. Indian perspective करोगे उसमें, Greek perspective करोगे, compare Gandhi, Ambedkar also, and 4. Rawls versus Sane, Rawls versus Dworkin, and Rawls versus Nozick's entitlement theory of justice. That will give you a very good idea. Okay? Rights, meaning theory and different kinds of right. इसमें इस बार you don't see many questions on this. Okay? Although one question that is related to that part of कौन सा question है? हाँ, multicultural perspective can slightly be linked to this, but we have not seen a very detailed question on this front. ठीक है? अब democracy. classical contemporary theories, different models represented. Normally you also get a question deliberative participatory. इस बार नहीं पूछा. इस बार क्या पूछा आपसे? Elitist theory of democracy, right? So here in a contemporary theory they've gone through like classical theories. This now has been asked this year very well. Okay, so power पे सवाल, जैसे for example there is a question on legitimacy also. Okay, and this question is very detailed because the mention of consent, everything is there. It also ties to the idea of Gramsci's hegemony. Okay, any other question on power? Macpherson views on power, but that is also linked to democracy, extractive developmental. ठीक, ideologies में अब state तो आ गया, ठीक, but यहाँ पे दो question आए इस बार. Fascism, comparative sense में, and feminism में क्या पूछा? I can again, personal is political, that is often a repeated question that we have seen. Now, IPT or WPT, for many people it's also a challenging part. It takes also time because this is very detailed. Syllabus ही इतना बड़ा syllabus है. अब इसमें IPT पे पूछा क्या आपसे? And imagine the options they have to test you. It can be Arthashastra, Buddhist, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, Aurobindo, Ambedkar, M. Roy, so it's a big topic, right? And WPT पे people spend 2 months preparing only this topic, right? Plato से क्या पूछा है? Karl Popper. One question is there. Locke पे question है इस बार. And there's also a question on Hannah Arendt. This year it has properly been represented. Normally in the last 2 or 3, 4 years we saw a declining trend. Now I think almost 40-45 है जो भी marks के questions आए हैं. This is there, but goes without saying अगली बार पे आपको करना पड़ेगा, right? So at least for paper 1A we see the questions more direct in nature, right? एक दो questions है जहाँ पे एक और चीज लिखी है with relevant examples also, right? So you prepare a list also. Examples कहाँ पूछे जाएंगे आपसे? जैसे इसमें पूछे जा सकते हैं, right? Ideologies में हमेशा scope है examples का. Socialism में you do types of socialism, also know in which areas of the world. Cuban socialism for example, yes or no? You should know examples here. You should know examples also here also. Legitimacy इनकी बात करी जो आपने पूछा सवाल. So our thing is, देखो, we have now the benefit of hindsight. Okay, we've also discussed some of these things. This is the way to upgrade the level of your preparation now. Okay, so that covers one section. Now we move to the other one. Okay, before that I also will tell you that we have a PSI 300 course. The next batch is starting from the 8th of September. Here of course we cover the entire syllabus through a crash course for every topic, followed by 300 questions. So for each topic we'll also be covering some practice questions, and this is followed by 20 tests. You have 14 sectional tests and you have 6 full day tests, right? In fact some of the questions that you are seeing here are also covered there. The questions will be reflective in nature. We cover 10 markers, 15 markers, 20 markers. So those of you who are preparing and especially who want to utilize the last 4 months, okay, especially well, so you can cover this. Proper schedule रहेगा अपना. Orientation session will also be again there. I think some of you are already joined in the previous batch. Okay, so that is just something in case you are interested. You can drop me a text on this number, or you can again ask for more details. Okay. Now we move to 1B. Okay. 1B में there is going to be some element of current affairs that one needs to anticipate, right? This year we will see some unusual trends also, something new that can also guide the light for the coming year, right? This is the syllabus that we go through. In the same manner, we'll also map the syllabus for the other part, right? वो देखते हैं अभी, एक बार देख लेते हैं. I'll also mark which portions from the exam have been asked from a current affairs perspective, okay? Here also some of the questions that we will see, right? चलो before okay, till now people online, do you have any doubt? I hope सब कुछ समझ में आ रहा है अच्छे से. Okay. Now explain briefly the role of peasant movements after. So they have given you a range. Now normally you also cover this topic in modern history also. So the factual details you can use for modern history. And when we cover, जैसे जब हम बात करते हैं ना different types of movement, अगर आप ये topic देख रहे हो, role of peasant movement, can you tell me which theory can be put here? Who would have analyzed the role of these movements? Huh? Marxists. And we've also done that, right? अगर आपने पढ़ा भी होगा, the different tribal movements or the peasant movements have been analyzed through different scholars, right? कि peasant movements में challenges क्या थे. Okay, there have been some other liberal scholars who have also done this. तो क्वेश्चन क्या है, रोल को एनालाइज करना है, आपको सिर्फ फैक्चुअल डिटेल्स नहीं देनी कि ये मूवमेंट हुआ, ये हुआ, ये हुआ. If the question was in GS1, it could have only be a descriptive question. हमारे लिए the question is analytical in nature. रोल क्या था पीजेंट मूवमेंट का? Did it have a class character? If you see the role, was it organized or not? What was the leadership comprised of? Right? Were they able to fulfill their goals? What were the methods? We have to talk on the role of this. And the role has evolved over a period of time. Yes or no? So that is what we have to comment on. So question क्या पूछ रहा है? Explain the role. If you have only mentioned the prominent peasant movements, कोई नाम बताओ कोई peasant movements के? Right? अब who's a prominent figure here who led the movements? Gandhi. Now Gandhi has been praised also, but he's been criticized by the Marxists also. Gandhi was said to be the supporter of the bourgeois, and ultimately he was one of the Marxist views is that Gandhi was just created as a safety valve, and whenever the movement was getting strong, Gandhi used to stop the movement. Let's say a case being, सबसे prominent example है चौरी चौरा, but that is again a Marxist view, right? The other argument is that for Gandhists, the hardcore Gandhians, उनका view क्या होगा? That Gandhi ensured continuity between means and ends. The moment he saw violence हो रहा है, वो रोक देंगे movement. But some Marxists will analyze it in a different light, saying that the Gandhi was again an instrument only of the bourgeois class. He also had a class character. So इस question में don't simply describe. You have to go beyond that. I hope people are able to follow. ठीक है? अच्छा, तो role of the peasant movements, you have to mention the prominent movements. The points that I've told you, the class character, the nature, all these things, the role, method, so on and so forth. And with some particular scholars, certain Marxists, etc., like Bipin Chandra, we have also quoted him in our classes many a times. His role, somebody else's, R.P. Dutt, for example, Sumit Sarkar, okay, there are other people who have also talked about how these movements have evolved over a period of time. ठीक है? चलो ये तो डायरेक्ट क्वेश्चन है सिलेबस से. व्हेन यू सी योर इंडियन नेशनल मूवमेंट, लेट्स से इफ आई सी, देखो पर्सपेक्टिव है, आखिरी पॉइंट क्या, देखो लिबरल, सोशलिस्ट, मार्क्सिस्ट, रेडिकल ह्यूमनिस्ट एंड डायरेक्ट सवाल है. जो भी क्वेश्चन हमारे डायरेक्ट होंगे, राइट, यू शुड प्रिपेयर इट टू द एक्सटेंट यू विल राइट अ वेरी गुड आंसर. These are the points where you can get an edge, because in 1B and of course in paper 2 there will be a scope for the examiner to give some curve balls and bouncers. वहां तो आपको सोचना पड़ेगा on the spot. तो जो ऑलरेडी डायरेक्ट सिलेबस में, दैट इज मोर स्टैटिक इन टर्म्स, यू शुड कवर दैट वेरी वेल. ओके, नाउ इफ आई जस्ट गिव यू एन ओवरव्यू, सी इंडियन नेशनल मूवमेंट हैज बीन एनालाइज्ड थ्रू वेरियस पर्सपेक्टिव्स. व्हाई वेरियस पर्सपेक्टिव? एक ही पर्सपेक्टिव करते हैं, आसान होगा हमारे लिए. क्यों चाहिए इतने पर्सपेक्टिव? Good, because ultimately you know history is written by the people who are victorious, who are winners. So what do we want? We want multiple nuances, multiple perspectives. Yes, so in that sense the voice of the Dalits has been many times overshadowed by the dominant sections. So here, which is why, who are the prominent persons who have given the Dalit perspective? Ambedkar, yes, Jyotiba Phule, right? So you have to have, so this, अब इसमें what you can bring in, you can bring in the Gramscian perspective. आपके I think just one day before also I had mentioned this. अगर question आता है IPT में, Indian National Movement में, even for Gandhi or for Ambedkar, we will bring the Gramscian perspective. The Dalit perspective ultimately helped in breaking the counter hegemony. Yes or no? They had their own intellectuals. They will be the organic intellectuals who will challenge the traditional intellectuals. Yes or no? So Gramscian movement will also bring the noted scholars and their work, and then their contribution, their criticism. So while it's a 10 marker, you have to have it structured. So what would you do? You would basically define what this movement was all about. You will tell the key exponents of the Dalit perspective, their ideas, okay, and also link it to the Gramscian sense. And later on, of course, we will also tell why is this criticized, and overall its overall conclusion and contribution. Simple conclusion ये भी हो सकता है that for a Indian national movement, one perspective cannot give you the holistic answer or analysis, which is why you need diversity of perspectives overall. Yes or no? That makes sense. Okay. अब आते हैं इस क्वेश्चन पे, नेक्स्ट वाले पे, की फैक्टर्स दैट हैव शेप्ड द इवॉल्विंग पॉलिटिकल लैंडस्केप in Jammu and Kashmir post 2019. Of course, this is a question direct current affairs. Now this question also, if you have seen the paper of GS2, okay, it is very rare. हाँ, अच्छा कुछ और मिस हुआ है? This is 5D. अच्छा 5C क्या है वो बताना? I think somehow this has gotten missed. Okay, no issues. Chalo, I'll take that up. Land reforms has led to constitutional amendment. Now, sometime back in the PYQ of paper 1B, a question was asked on the first constitutional amendment. Can you tell me, is this question and this question linked or not? Yes. Is the question on land reforms, is it based on economics or is it based on constitutional politics? Constitutional politics. अब देखो, when land reforms were introduced, okay, अब यहाँ पे ultimately tussle कहाँ पे शुरू होगी? DPSP versus fundamental rights, okay. So especially even with the first constitutional amendment act, what was created? 9th schedule, and especially with respect to redistribution of land, if any item was put in the 9th schedule, it would be beyond judicial review. Of course, this was changed later on in the where a particular cutoff date was also created, the IR Coelho case, very prominent case. This has been asked in GS2 mains also. Fine. So ये जो tussle है कि land reforms के लिए constitutional amendments, of course you have the first constitutional amendment act, and not just this. इस क्वेश्चन में हमें इसकी बात करनी पड़ेगी, the शंकरी प्रसाद case, we can also talk about गोलकनाथ case. Ultimately the tussle whether how much parliament can also evolve. So while the question is on land reforms, but it also touches upon the elements of the amending power of the parliament also, but that is secondary. Primary part क्या है? To enable land reforms, there were some amendments done. Now whether the amendments were within the right of the parliament or not, in some cases because they would want to expand the powers, right? हाँ बिल्कुल बिल्कुल हाँ, because वो उसके बाद आएगा, जैसे मैंने बोला ना, the Golaknath case. After Golaknath case, of course you have the Keshavanand Bharati case, and first constitutional amendment act 24th, 25th, they were added to increase the amending power of the parliament, but later on reversed because nothing can violate the basic structure of the Indian constitution. That is the most important takeaway for us. तो इस क्वेश्चन में प्लीज डोंट बी मिस्टेकन, सीइंग लैंड रिफॉर्म्स है और आप फिर सारा है ना डिफरेंट लेट्स से आचार्य विनोबा भावे की बात करें और सब कुछ करें तो फिर यू विल गेट डाइग्रेस्ड. क्वेश्चन इज एक्चुअली ऑन इंडियाज कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट्स, फर्स्ट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट एक्ट. दिस इज हाउ यू कैन मेंशन. I know it's a 10 marker, you will not be able to write all the cases, but the gist is that you have to talk about. Okay, this is 5D. Okay, this is 5D. Achha, and this is 5E. Okay. The key factors that have shaped. Ab dekho, no doubt this question could have been slightly challenging in the sense you don't read it directly. Now in these kind of questions, if somebody would have prepared it for the GS2 part etc, so you cannot differentiate too much in this sense. तो अगर GS का भी basic level का अगर में content आ रहा है कि what are the key factors that have shaped the evolving landscape in Jammu, and question में it is very clear what they are asking. Post 2019, right? So you have to also let's say take into account what changes have happened either in the assembly, okay, in terms of representation. Representation, this can also be linked to ultimately the case for delimitation also. How many people have to be represented, better governance, better political let's say representation, leadership, etc etc. So that this is what you have to tell, right? So amongst the questions that we have seen, this will be a slightly tricky one, especially because it is directly in the current affairs, okay? And a person may not have prepared it directly, right? So in this question, whatever knowledge one would have had for GS, they can do so. A takeaway perhaps in this question can be, especially let's say when we talk about federalism, let's say we talk about Article 370 and its abrogation and its aftermath, okay? Because this question has been seen in both the papers. GS2 mains में भी आया और इसमें भी आया है, right? In that sense, the examiner tries to show that this is an important topic. They were expecting the students to prepare. You were saying something. हाँ 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 राइट हाँ हाँ आगे 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 हाँ अपने no we have to talk more about the factors that have shaped the landscape, so which means one aspect will be the security, one aspect will be representation. तो इन सारे regular elections, तो how will that happen? तो ultimately the balance between representation, how would that happen between development and security? और उसमें भी the local, because ultimately the if you have free and fair elections going on, better representation, तो क्या होगा? Local demands will be met. अगर elections नहीं कराओगे तो क्या होगा? You have to have so much of security. तो ultimately how to have normalcy is the main point. So that is the point, saying what are the key factors that have shaped the evolving political landscape. And when I say it is evolving, it means it has multiple challenges in this. So overall the role of the government is to be चलो वो बहुत ही सिर्फ that is only economic sense, but overall not only from a demographic angle but also from a developmental angle. Okay, so that should be the core concern for us to think about in this manner. Okay. Okay, now let's move ahead. Question: how far has been the NHRC successful in achieving its objectives? Now, if you go back, while doing social movements, we had done 2 organizations in detail. कौन कौन से करे थे हमने? याद आ रहा है? तुम्हें तो अच्छे से नोट्स बनाए थे क्लास में. So we had done this one. NHRC, we had also done the women movements, and in fact I also told you that in general the bodies, they have general issues overall. Okay, all the bodies have generally the issues related to funds, issues of political appointments, issues of functions not having enough capacity, etc etc. तो यहाँ पे हमने 2 movements बहुत डिटेल में कर रखे थे, the 2 bodies. Okay, but other than that, this is a big static factual topic, and sometimes they're asking you some developments on this front. So let me go back to the question now. हाँ, how far पूछा है, ठीक है? इस क्वेश्चन में आप किसी भी कमीशन से रिप्लेस कर दो. This question can also be asked for you in GS2 and GS this also, especially for NHRC, क्योंकि in the last topic social movements, you have human rights movements also and you have women rights movement also. इसीलिए हमने इन दोनों पे बहुत केस स्टडीज देख रखी हैं. Yes or no? Especially for these two, you should prepare it well, and slightly in more detail than the GS2 counterpart. GS2 with, of course, you know, you'll tell the act, you'll tell the provisions, features, how much have you implemented it. The question is how far, so it means to some extent, yes or no? So is this question, you have to talk about the positives, but also you have to talk about the lacunas, the challenges, etc. So you have to mention both the sides. So even when I say to what extent, राइट सक्सेसफुल तो आप बता सकते हो 3 से 4 जगह जहां अच्छा है. चैलेंजेस आप बताओ कहां कहां पे नहीं है सक्सेसफुल, बताओ. वी हैव डन दिस इन द क्लास. थिंक अबाउट AFSPA. ओके, अभी भी देयर इज AFSPA, आर्म्ड फोर्सेस स्पेशल पावर्स एक्ट. सो इट इज नॉट इन द एम्बिट ऑफ NHRC. NHRC कैन नॉट डू एनीथिंग अबाउट इट. ओके, वन इशू इज AFSPA. अदर देन दैट, व्हाट आर द इश्यूज? The issue of overcrowding of prisons, that also leads to human rights violations. Huge amount of under trials that are in India. Any other thing that comes to mind? Chalo, as a body, here also the issue is nature of appointments. Okay, is also political in nature. एक ये भी issue है. Next is very limited capacity. हाँ ठीक है, बहुत बिल्कुल. तो human rights जहाँ भी violations हो रहे हैं, human rights violations, and they are happening. So those will be the challenges that they are still in front of them. You can also quote relevant Supreme Court. In fact, you also know a common thing is these are what? Toothless tigers. हमने ये भी लिखा था to make it a tooth tiger, what should be done? याद आ रहा है क्लास में? तो exactly तो पूरा points, मतलब you could have written this, not a very difficult question. ठीक है. बिल्कुल लिख सकते हो, बिल्कुल. हाँ, राइट राइट राइट. And you should prepare this topic also from a 20 marker point of view, so you'll have enough content to write here. ठीक है. Now, is this the next one, parliamentary वाला? Let me also open the paper so that sequence is properly followed. यही है ना? ठीक है. Okay, 6A है, parliamentary committees are a strong tool of parliamentary democracy. It provides opportunity, हाँ, of cross pollination of ideas among members of parliament. Okay. Now, what is the broad context? किस टॉपिक या किस ब्रॉड एरिया से टॉपिक आ रहा है? ठीक है. नो, इन द one day long वाला GS2 class we have covered specific on parliamentary committees also, but I'm just asking you, where do you think this topic is coming? Can be linked to which area? Functioning of parliament. And right now the issue is decline of parliament. Issue is fewer bills are being, let's say, going for analysis to the parliamentary committees also, right? So इस question में of course you can talk about starting, it's a 20 marker, parliament being the temple of democracy, right? And the main core function of parliament is debate, discussion and deliberation. And directly talk about, let's say, in the 18th Lok Sabha or in general, there is a decline of parliamentary productivity also, and there is also decline of quality of legislations and debates. Okay? In this question, then you link it also and talk about how parliamentary committees help in this regard. Kyun bani committees? To keep an oversight. Okay? To help in better quality of debates. They say they can have an oversight even on the budget related documents. Okay? So here when you see the parliamentary committees, main thing is they have a very important function, right? That is not only oversight, they bring in expertise. If the bills are properly discussed, debated, etc., the quality of legislation and ultimately the parliament is made stronger, right? It provides cross-pollination. कैसे? There are many committees. कैसे? Example बताओ. Of course, there are departmental standing committees. आपके पास सब ad hoc committees हैं. You have estimates committee, PSC, public accounts committee. What is the work of these committees? यही सारे important काम हैं इनके, right? This could have been written. अब इस क्वेश्चन में चैलेंज क्या होगा कि specific parliament committee related scholar of you may not know, but if you know overall issues of decline of parliament, उस point से इस आंसर को लिख सकते हो. ठीक है, because normally you don't expect, ये क्वेश्चन अगर 10 मार्कर में आता, people will be fine. In a 20 marker, it will be a challenge to write this question with the kind of depth one would assume. So in this question, I am expecting most of the students would have written from a general GS2 perspective only. The things that you can add is perhaps what you have written and done in the parliament chapter. या decline of parliament, वहाँ पे भी commentaries of be it प्रताप भानु मेहता, okay, even सुभाष कश्यप, हमने जो भी लिखे हैं, उनको आप ला सकते हो. Overall, how the decline of parliament can overall be arrested. In that, you highlight the role how parliament committees can be made stronger. Okay, जैसे हमने देखा है that even second ARC talks about 120 days of sitting and even mandatory compulsory referral of bills to the parliamentary standing committee. जब तक कोई चीज compulsory नहीं होगी, there will always be a discretion. So main core issue is the number of bills etc. that are going to these committees has come down significantly if we compare. So that again is a challenge that one can talk about. Okay. हाँ. Not related direct. इनका काम है at least the bills etc. जो बाकी चीजें हैं. अच्छा, what is the issue with parliamentary committees? एक होता है कि 20 मार्क करे, challenges भी लिखने पड़ेंगे. अच्छा ठीक, और सोचो. गुड. और टाइम का भी इशू है. सेकंड, थर्ड, they also have limited staff, limited capacity, limited expertise. Then one issue is these are ex post facto. अगर expenditure is done, then only they will act. They cannot act suo moto or before the expenditure or before the verdict. Yes or no? ये सारे issues हैं यहाँ पे. So again, I'm just giving you an overview, right? These topics, of course, can be done, but please, for this question, we know कि highly specialized answer लिखना इसमें मुश्किल होगा on the spot in 20 markers because directly you don't expect it. Normally, when you prepare parliament as a whole. But from that, the content that you have, you can use it, use the GS2 knowledge and construct an answer. Okay? Then, examine the constitutional provisions and the nature of advisory jurisdiction of Supreme Court of India. Okay, evaluate your answers with relevant examples. This also is a current affairs inspired question. Which article are they talking about? Okay, 143 has been in the news sometime, right? अब इस question में भी again, normally when we prepare Supreme Court, we normally prepare Supreme Court as a whole. ठीक है? We can talk about Article 142, we can talk about appointment, we can talk about all the other related aspects. So purely if the question is on the nature of advisory jurisdiction, you can talk about it, but बहुत specific लिख पाना इस पे in the given time, because again, मैं ये नहीं कह सकते सारे क्वेश्चन आ सकते. The questions which are tough, I'll tell you the questions which are tough. So this is not that easy a question, okay? If you have to write specific, otherwise some students may only have written about Supreme Court entirely in the answer, they may not get good marks. Why? The question is more specific in nature. So which is why when you have to choose questions, ये देखो कौन से markers में 20, 15, 15, in which do you know the best possible scenario that is there, right? So if somebody would have known the reference of Article 143 and the related part of the current affairs, you could have linked it and then talk about advisory jurisdiction. Talking of advisory jurisdiction of Supreme Court, is that binding? ये सब पढ़ते हैं हम, it is not binding. Then what is its relation to pre-constitutional treaties, etc. Presidential अगर reference है on that, these points you can add to ultimately, because it's a 15 marker. याद करो, बहुत specific पूछा इस बार इन्होंने, ठीक है? So this is again one question. I'll say it is not direct, highly current affairs inspired. Okay, so this is going to be challenging. And again, the mention is relevant examples. So extra thing for paper 1B that one needs to know, be it judiciary, be it parliament, you have to have a list of examples ready. तो चाहे आप judicial activism पढ़ो, overreach पढ़ो, basic structure पढ़ो, कुछ पढ़ो, articles और examples जरूर तैयार करो अपने लिए अच्छे से. You also do it for GS2, but you also have to incorporate that in PSIR. Right? A PSIR में already you read a lot about different people who have given commentaries, be it Pradha Bhanu Mehta, okay, and we have seen even the views of certain lawyers and even some experts. Fine, you can use that in the answer. So if somebody would have to do this question, of course you will talk about Supreme Court, include the aspects of advisory jurisdiction, the limitations that it has with examples, then you can write that. But कहीं ना कहीं पे शायद 15 marker है, maybe somewhere you may think एक paragraph कहीं पे कम हो सकता हो. Okay, so that is also a challenge in this particular question. Okay, अब ये देखते हैं, the recent developments in Indian politics has, सबसे important है, अगर आपने ये miss कर दिया, not eroded the true spirit of federalism in India. Now this is a topic that we have done fairly well. Now in this topic federalism पे सिर्फ 3C framework याद रखना होता है अपने को. 3C means one is collaboration या cooperation, second is, and third is confrontation. And for each point we have respective many examples to talk about. Okay, अगर ये क्वेश्चन नॉट भी हटा देता तो भी हम आंसर लिख लेते. क्वेश्चन क्या था, रीसेंट डेवलपमेंट इन इंडियन पॉलिटिक्स हैज नॉट इरोडेड the true spirit of federalism in India, and again critically examine this with the help of appropriate illustrations. Fine, so you have to ultimately tell that the federal spirit, okay, article 246 maybe it is still there, schedule 7 mein, even though there are some challenges. Now the issue here is slightly interpretation mein, recent development. So how broad and how wide do you want to go, because we already know. पहले बताओ क्या friction है between center and state, confrontation क्यों होता है? गवर्नर, आर्टिकल 356 इट इज मिसयूज्ड. गवर्नर में भी रिसेंट इशू क्या था, आर्टिकल 200 201. ओके, द टाइम पीरियड अभी हमने देखा, द तमिलनाडु गवर्नर केस फॉर एग्जांपल. दिस इज वन एस्पेक्ट. देन द इशू ऑफ राइजिंग रीजनल पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज वर्सेस द पार्टी एट द सेंटर, विच इज व्हाई द डिमांड्स फॉर लैंग्वेज एटसेट्रा कम इन. और क्या कन्फ्रंटेशन है, वेपनाइजेशन ऑफ इंस्टीट्यूशंस, ED, CI करो, NIA, CBI, etc. Even that can be a source of confrontation. And one more source of confrontation can be the fiscal, money wala part. So, okay, I can also say interstate water disputes, etc., etc. Broadly speaking. But question क्या कह रहा है? The recent developments in Indian politics, it has not eroded the true spirit of federalism. What is the true spirit of federalism? India? yes, that despite some challenges that you see, etc., there is still an element of competition and collaboration. And how does that happen? देखो, federalism is the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. किसने कहा था? SR Bommai case 1994. Okay. So overall, while you will say that there are some elements, maybe through the rise of coalition politics or regional party politics, that has led to some challenges, but it is only incidental. Okay, these are only sporadic, but largely there is still huge elements of cooperation that are still seen. Okay, there is a scope for dialogue, discussion. Institutions like Niti Aayog, you have Interstate Council, Article 263. Okay, interstate water disputes के लिए you have mechanisms. हर चीज को resolve करने के लिए mechanisms हैं. Yes or no? So these are some of the broad points you can talk about in this manner. Illustrations के साथ overall लिखते हुए. Federalism is something that you prepare and you discuss. अगर question उल्टा भी होता, अगर question होता, what are the rising challenges to Indian federalism? Then you will expand more on the confrontation part. Tone देखनी है question की. Question की tone क्या है हमारी? कि the recent development जो भी हो रहा है development recent times में, it has not eroded the spirit of federalism in India. Okay, which means there are some checks and balances. There are the judiciary checks. There are some institutions which are working around the clock, which ensure the federal spirit remains intact. Yes or no? And of course, remember, India is a coming together, a holding together model of federalism. Holding together है, ठीक है? India is not like the union of USA. We have indestructible union of destructible states. Okay, fine. अब आते हैं. This is 7A. Okay. Enunciate impediments to women participation in local governance in the process of political decentralization. ठीक है? This is a 20 marker. And it is this question which we can confidently say all the recent works of scholars, even like Elinor Armstrong, वो सब हमने कर रखा था. ठीक है? Neerja Gopal Jayal, that big Boti book of Oxford, वो सब हमने करा हुआ है. You will also see that in the coming classes, etc. So this is one question, because normally in this question people will not have enough content to write. ठीक है? अपने वाले केस में we have done this fairly well, right? Now question क्या है? Impediments to women participation. आप बताओ क्या impediment है? Something that directly should come to. Of course, there are many scholars will talk about it. जैसे subsidy issues क्या हैं? आप सोचो. बिल्कुल. So पंचायत पति syndrome number 1. Second. अच्छा, और कुछ? Funds की बात करो. The issue of this, right? और नहीं, पर her idea was that बहुत पुराना idea, मतलब not directly linked to India then, या फिर आप उसको लिंक करना पड़ेगा. जैसे we say one is born women, one where are the women can be used. ठीक है? Simply highlighting the level of representation is not as per desired. Okay, where are the women, etc. You can talk about. और impediments क्या है यहाँ पे? Of course, basic points like the patriarchy. Okay, not having enough representation at the political sphere, other systemic challenges, capacity building. Okay, education, skills, all of that you can mention here. तो ये भी हो सकता है. और क्या challenges आएंगे in the process of political decentralization? And one, of course, the panchayat pati syndrome, that even when they're given powers, it is merely illusory. There's an illusion of power that they have. They don't have the real powers. That is what you can also say. ठीक है? तो इस केस में जब impediments बताओगे, your answer should not end at the impediments, the challenges that they face. The answer should go beyond this. इसके beyond क्या होना चाहिए? The solutions, the committees, the recommendations. How can women participation be made better? How can it be made more representative? Now, as per the PRIs, how much reservation do women have in PRIs? 1/3, right? So 1/3 में, is it really happening? And is it only procedural? It is procedural, it is not substantive. उसको कैसे broad based करा जाए? How there should be more consultations? How there should also be in the parties also who are fighting, they don't have also democracy. So the true women leaders are not given the right seats also. Sometimes क्या होगा? Somebody who's very popular will also be elected, not the people who actually have done the hard work, etc. So यहाँ पे दोनों चीजें. You just don't have to end at the impediments, but you also have to explain the other part while giving some scholarly inputs to differentiate your answer. ठीक है? वो जरूरी रहेगा in this part to explain. Okay? चलो, ये क्वेश्चन हर साल एक्सपेक्टेड होता है. डायरेक्ट देयर इज अ टॉपिक, यू नो, द रोल ऑफ कास्ट, religion and ethnicity in Indian politics. Fine. The question says the caste remains a vital axis for political mobilization in India. Okay, how would the caste census address the aspirations of the people? Fine. इस क्वेश्चन में especially those who have done the caste वाला part well, we have done all the analysis, सारे important people, works of, नाम बताओ किस किसके works पढ़े हमने? चलो ये तो और नया है. सबसे strong work M.N. Srinivas, again proper sociologist, Rajni Kothari, okay, and Yogendra Yadav, ठीक है, तो of course, and then link it to the caste census. So this is where, because caste will be, again we know that Indians don't cast a vote, they vote their caste. All these prominent, so M.S. Srinivas, very prominent figure, Rajni Kothari, and later on end with Yogendra Yadav, his all works. So ये जो questions है जो direct मिलेंगे, इसलिए मुझे this वाला section is more easier to do as compared to the previous one which had more difficult questions. So you cannot, in this question you have a mix of static part also and current part, right? So evolution of how, so please remember, it remains a vital axis. And while discussing, if you remember, we spoke about how India is a prismatic society. So India में elections हैं, this is what modern part. But India में एक और issue क्या है? We also still vote based on religion. We still vote based on caste-related factors. Can we say that also? So this question will get repeated every year. ये आपके topic में लिखा हुआ है. Caste और religion में सवाल आएंगे. The moment you prepare this very well, link it to caste census, your job gets done. Okay? And when you say, how would the caste census address the aspiration of people? You tell me, how would you open this question? Caste census may, of course, it can address the aspirations, but can it also create new challenges? Both points have to be mentioned. जब भी आप question देखो, as a student of humanities basically here also, you will always have two sides to one point. Here also there will be two sides. It can address, because some of the castes, right now what happens? Right now, the enumeration of castes happen only for, let's say, the SCs and STs. Even when the Mandal Commission spoke about 20% reservation, okay, 27% reservation, that was based on 1931 census. In 2011, we had a socio-economic caste census. Now that was done by MORD, Ministry of Rural Development, okay. But even that census had many issues. So when the question says, how would the census address the aspirations of people? On one end, it will provide the correct number, at least we can say that, new updated number. If you have a new number, you can make better policies, evidence-based policy making, this can help in social justice, all of that. But at the same time, this is also fraught with administrative challenges. It is also fraught with, ab yaad karo, I've also mentioned, Ambedkar spoke about annihilation of caste. But more and more reservation is leading to affirmation of caste and perpetuation of caste, which was also what Pratap Bhanu Mehta says. So ultimately, it can also be weaponized, it can also be used as the instrument or a political tool. So इस question में ये सारे points आने चाहिए. So your analysis, your points, all of this should get reflected. That is what my point is. ठीक है? So some of these points we can mention and I think highlight, okay, in this area. All right. Now, no, see, merely going on the bill would not help. In this case, overall an analysis based on this, I think now your point should be answered. Smaller developments nahi, make comprehensive, if we integrate all these things in one, then it is better. Is the voice fine? Climate Pact, आपका नाम है? Is the voice fine for other people online or is it low? Okay. Now, there is a debate on the procedure for appointment of the Chief Election Commissioner and election commissioners to the Election Commission of India. Analyze the various aspects. Again, a question which is current affairs inspired. Now, normally, when we prepare elections and these areas, the question generally is on Election Commission as a body. In that body, when we say appointments are political in nature, अब क्या हो गया, ये क्वेश्चन क्या हो गया, ज्यादा स्पेसिफिक, वेरी स्पेसिफिक, राइट? द क्वेश्चन इज डिबेट ऑन द प्रोसीजर फॉर अपॉइंटमेंट. सो ऑफ कोर्स यू कैन टेल व्हाट इज दिस and tell what all the allegations and the criticism based on the procedure of appointment to Chief Election Commission. Okay? Now what can you just summarize what is the issue? क्या debate है actually यहाँ पे? Of course the role of the executive. Anything else apart from that? बिल्कुल ठीक है. और is that properly fixed? Is there a proper? नहीं, tenure. Correct. So composition, in fact, even that had changed. कभी क्या होता है CEC +5, sorry +4, +3, +2, even that can change. Number one. Second, the issues and allegations of transparency, the nature of appointment being biased, and link it to free and fair elections. Article 324, 326, the overall mandate of the body. Okay. So main क्या है जो debate है on the procedure. Okay. Ad hoc in nature, biasness of executive या overbearing nature of executive is part. Okay. और इसके various aspects को analyze करना है. So again, please note here, this question is very nuanced, very specific in nature. So while you will be able to at least write for a 10 marker, for a 15 marker, and with all the depth, थोड़ा मुश्किल होगा. S.Y. Qureshi, I keep on telling you that you read some of his articles. So even he has an opinion on this if you read some of the older articles. Okay, the former CEC, S.Y. Qureshi, for example. Okay, but this is also one question that tells you that some of these bodies that have been asked to you this year are current oriented and more specific in nature, right? ये question बहुत specific हो जाएगा. अगर question broad भी होगा, for example, with respect to the election commission, then it is a fair question to talk about. But here the question is even specific in the procedure of appointment. जिसने लिखा भी होगा, I think you would have written on these dimensions, but उसके beyond फिर elaborate करना is a challenge. And again, जिन questions we are seeing it's a tough question. It is tough for all the people who are giving the exam. Okay, so writing all the scholarly arguments and finishing this, so which is why the papers also have relative marking, है ना? तो ऐसा नहीं है the people who've given it सोचें कि यार अब I could not write this etc. So there will be always a couple of questions in the exam. वो वहीं पे fight करना पड़ेगा, वो देखना पड़ेगा. उसी तरह से एक और there is one more question on this. Okay. अच्छा, the question I think says, sorry, हाँ 8A, right? 8A. And this question says delimitation or what? The read करेगा question. I think there's a typo on our slide. हाँ, okay. Then there's a typo in this case. Okay. Now this has been in news, right? But this also is a question that has a huge bearing of current, and normally you do not see such questions directly as a 20 marker. Normally आप IGP में questions क्या देखते हो? Either let's say question of president, governor, some of the topics that are conventional in nature directly from the syllabus. Okay, specifically this, and this does not have a precedent. We have seen this new question appearing in, right? So this also, and especially with the rest 3 or 4 questions, we've seen almost 4 or 5 questions from current affairs in IGP. Okay, which increases the scope of what we were reading traditionally, right? So one of the takeaways, first the takeaway from the question is, okay, not only the regional or the political party or some of these debates, but even some of the issues that you also read in GS2, okay, or overall broad national issues should be covered, right? That is number one. ठीक है, अब ये depend करता है that you had to, many people which I have spoken to have attempted more questions from the paper 1A, more direct है, तो आपके पास एक ही क्वेश्चन बच रहा था. तो आई थिंक मोस्ट प्रोबेबली 7th बहुत लोगों ने किया होगा, क्योंकि ये भी 20 मार्कर पे प्रॉपर रिफाइंड कंटेंट एटसेट्रा लिखना. यू मे राइट सम पॉइंट्स, ऐसा नहीं है इशू. बिकॉज सी द मोमेंट सेंसस है, यही जो हमने बात करी, इट हैज रीओपन द डिबेट ऑन डीलिमिटेशन. So you are linking it to the allocation of seats, for example, because ultimately the freeze on delimitation, etc., the year that is mentioned, directly it is linked to which part? Political power. Yes or no? ये भी important point है. So if that becomes a very essential component to debate here. So here census will create new challenges that we know, but you have to talk about how is it linked to political power, political representation. So that is a point that must be explained in this manner, right? तो वो हम जरूर बताएंगे इस क्वेश्चन में डिलिमिटेशन वाले केस के साथ. टॉकिंग ऑफ डिलिमिटेशन यू विल आल्सो आर्ग्यू, क्योंकि क्वेश्चन क्या है, व्हाट हैज इट द डिबेट्स ऑन डिलिमिटेशन. फाइन. सो इसमें व्हाट अदर पॉइंट्स कैन वी टॉक अबाउट? And here also there are some articles, but right now first focus on arguments. What argument should we have? And only when we are clear with the arguments, then we should focus on the other related aspects to this. Sorry? साउथ वाले नॉट तो नहीं, बट ऑफ कोर्स लिमिटेड अंडर, हाँ ठीक है. और क्या बोल सकते हैं? गुड पॉइंट, दैट्स आल्सो फेयर डिबेट. ठीक है, तो अभी इसमें भी मेन जो इशू आएगा, ultimately population and census is हमारे, you have a representative democracy, so bring in representative democracy, people have to choose the representatives. Now the seats were frozen based on the older census, and now if the new census is to be done, अगर आप नहीं करोगे old seats है, that is also not true with principles of natural justice, that is not true with democracy. For representative democracy, how many people are there? You should have seats based on a particular number, पहली बात तो. Second, you also have to ensure there should be no disparity between different regions of India. So regional issues होंगे, which will also include the issues of again federalism, center versus state, and state versus state also there will be debates, right? The states who have had better population control, तो ये भी point आ जाएगा, population control, demography, good population control measures. Of course, in the Finance Commission also, 15th Finance Commission, they were making this argument that they are being penalized for better population control measures. वो भी जरूरी है बताना, yes or no? So how to resolve that? So not only are we talking about the population control, we are talking about number of people, but most important क्या है? Seats, because seats will determine political power, representation, and that must be done in a proper manner, in a transparent manner, etc., so that people also get to know that everything is getting properly allocated and distributed. So this is why this will become, and it opens a huge Pandora's box, which is why multiple perspectives are there. This will also mean the socio-economic profile of the parliamentarians may also change, right? So parliament में representation के point पे, also in terms of power sharing, so from a federal angle also, Schedule 7 and Article 246, and also from the democracy angle, these are the major debates you have to highlight in this case, because democracy is ultimately empowerment of people via their representatives. For that you have to fix seats, yes or no? Some of these points have to be outlined in this. So interesting question है, no doubt. Now this is a direct proper question, हमने बहुत डिटेल में सिर्फ ये भी नहीं किया है. In fact, if you remember, I've also quoted very specific books on these topics. Okay, how Nehru failed, for example, that we've seen. Not only Nehru, but we've also seen Gandhi. ये proper topic है syllabus का आपके. With reference to Nehruvian experience of planning and economic development, examine how the early phase of economic planning in India has laid out the foundation for future development. So talk about the Mahalanobis model. Okay, we'll talk about how initially, for example, there was a lot of centralized planning. Okay, the Soviet influence that we see, the development of industries, etc., and the early phase of planning and its priorities, etc., we'll have to talk about, and you have to link it. How does it lay the foundation for future development? In fact, this was also criticized for the Hindu rate of growth. Okay, and ultimately कोई भी क्वेश्चन नेहरू वाले पार्ट में cannot be completed without the criticism, because post 1991 we reversed a lot of things. We ended license Raj, we enabled liberalization, privatization, globalization, yes or no? So many new things were added. So this question is a very specific question on, okay, this can be done with proper value addition and enrichment, and this is also what we've done, right? ठीक है. This is the 8C. अच्छा, last one. ठीक है. Illustrate with examples how RPP regional parties in India have played a crucial role in drawing the historically advantaged groups into the mainstream political systems. अच्छा, how? अच्छा, it is not regional. अच्छा, okay. So there should be a typo then. Is this correct now? So let me also see this. How political parties in India played a crucial role in drawing the historically disadvantaged groups into mainstream. ठीक है? अब examples बताने हैं with parties. अब just tell me, how are you thinking? This political parties we have done in huge detail with relevant examples across regions of India. सोच के बताओ. Of course, we have done the Bullock capitalists, Rudolph and Rudolph, all of that analysis. और सोचो, हाँ? Democratic upsurge, very important. The democratic upsurge has happened in two phases. Yogendra Yadav talks about first democratic upsurge and a second democratic upsurge, right? So that has happened. Good. उस पर कौन सी पार्टीज के नाम लिख सकते हो? राइट, एसपी, ऑल्सो बीएसपी. तो इसमें प्रॉपर पार्टीज एंड प्रॉपर वर्क वी हैव टू राइट. यू कैन कोट योगेंद्र यादव. We'll talk about democratic upsurge and how this has happened. Other than that, all बताओ. So this can be highlighted. Rudolph and Rudolph. Anything else that you can talk about? ठीक है, बट यहां पे एक कोर कंसर्न इसको दिखाना पड़ेगा हिस्टोरिकली. ओके, कैन वी ऑल्सो नॉट टॉक अबाउट डीएमके एंड एआईडीएमके who also spoken about social justice? Okay, so there will be regional groups and regional areas, even that you can also highlight. The concern for social justice has been a concern in many political parties. जब बात है बहुजन समाज पार्टी एक्सेट्रा, ऑल ऑफ दैट, व्हाट इज द कोर आइडिया दैट दे प्रोपोगेट? राइट, नहीं अपीसमेंट से ज्यादा फर्स्ट इज सोशल जस्टिस टू ब्रिंग द हिस्टोरिकली डिसएडवांटेज सेक्शन. सो वन इज बोथ दीज पार्टीज वर्क यू हैव टू हाईलाइट. ओके, इवन दे हैव आल्सो क्रिएटेड प्रेशर इन लॉ मेकिंग आल्सो. ओके, वी कैन आल्सो मेंशन हाउ ये चीज आप भूल गए, मंडल कमीशन and the huge change it created, and how all of that will reinforce both caste and religion as an important determinant in the politics of India. Can we say that? So this will reinforce the role of caste. But there is not a specific party, but of course broadly speaking you can talk about that. Overall there has been not all the parties, but some parties have given the consensus for 106, right, Nari Shakti Bandhan. But यहाँ पे देखना है historically disadvantaged groups में, तो we've seen caste wise also, class wise groups we've also seen, right? Anything else? In fact अब यहाँ पे आप केरला एंड वेस्ट बंगाल के examples भी ले सकते हो. Okay, we have seen which the CPI etc. parties who have talked about redistribution of land. So better land reforms have been seen in those areas. Better distributive justice कह सकते हैं. So in this question your answer will depend on how well you put and organize the points. When we do the party system, when we say that India moved from one party system, Congress system as was seen, to a different party system, there is a change that is getting seen. Can we say that? Okay, so a lot of these points can be answered here. So this is what I think you can talk about. All right, so here not only do you need the examples, you also need the substantiation. Fine. Now before I come to the last slide on coverage, I'll also then go back to the syllabus that we have for paper 1B. अब यहाँ एक बार देखते हैं. This year, very interestingly, this is not represented at all. Something that we spend a lot of time on. ये नहीं आया इस बार. And sometimes even two questions can come. Women movements, environment movements, civil and human rights. Okay, but that is the nature. You have so many topics. Only some questions can be asked. Yes or no? Similarly, trends of electoral behavior. Interesting question है, not asked. Even changing socio-economic profile, not asked. Okay, pressure groups, so on and so forth, not asked. Only a question on political parties has been asked that we have seen. So while this is a very broad topic, many times people have difficulty in covering this topic. This has not been asked. Okay, no issues. Caste, religion not covered directly, but caste has been covered. Ethnicity not covered this time. Planning and economic development, direct a question on Nehruvian. पिछले साल, इससे पहले साल गांधी आ चुका है. इसी में ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन है, इसी में लैंड रिफॉर्म्स है. एंड व्हेन यू डू लैंड रिफॉर्म्स हियर, यू आल्सो डू द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल एंगल, बट यू आल्सो डू द मार्क्सिस्ट एनालिसिस ऑफ लैंड रिफॉर्म्स. ओके, सो दैट इज वन. फेडरलिज्म पे चलो, वी हैव अ डायरेक्ट क्वेश्चन दिस टाइम, बट सी देयर आर सो मेनी थिंग्स. दिस टाइम द क्वेश्चन वाज इट हैज नॉट चेंज द फेडरल स्ट्रक्चर, योर मेन पार्ट. दिस इज आल्सो अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट थीम. एवरी ईयर यू विल गेट क्वेश्चंस. नाउ इन दिस पार्ट, और ओवरऑल आई कैन से यू हैड अ करंट अफेयर्स इंस्पायर्ड क्वेश्चन ऑन an overall broad question also on the census of 2027. Statutory institutions commissions में one thing that we can also take away is you have to cover the current affairs if it is there with any of these bodies. ठीक है, इस साल क्या पूछा? नेशनल ह्यूमन राइट्स कमीशन. बट न्यूज में दो और कमीशन बहुत रहते हैं. वन इज नेशनल कमीशन फॉर विमेन एंड वन इज नेशनल कमीशन फॉर माइनॉरिटीज. नॉट दैट की अदर कमीशंस आर नॉट इंपॉर्टेंट. Finance Commission, normally the examiner asks you if there is any specific report. अगर 14th या 15th Finance Commission है, then a question of fiscal federalism can be asked, let's say. Okay, now grassroots movements पे एक direct question देखा हमने. हाँ, even election commission तो सबसे पहला है. A current affairs inspired question has been asked here, right? Then grassroots democracy पे we have seen the women angle they have asked you, right? But in the last previous years, direct questions on 74th and 73rd have also been asked. ठीक है, तो legal angle से पूछ सकते हैं वो भी तैयार होना चाहिए अपना. Okay, यहाँ पे we've seen the principal organs of government, etc. Okay, salient features. In this salient features, the question of land reforms and constitution, I will link it to this part. Okay, but that said, इस साल you did not see any question on FR and DPSP. Normally a question on FR or DPSP is asked. ठीक है, or basic structure, fine. So the point is they will keep on changing. You also have to evolve. Legacy, etc. not properly seen, but yes, Dalit perspective was seen. And one question came on the peasant movement. There are many things: worker movement, peasant movement, military, revolutionary, non, etc. all these elements. ठीक है? हाँ, तो अब वही है. This preamble से one expected question was whether the terms sovereign, whether the terms socialists or secular, they should be removed or not. There was a petition that was taken by the court. The court dismissed the petition, saying that even if these terms were added retrospectively, there is no ground that they should be removed. Fine. Now, overall takeaways की हम बात करते हैं. कुछ points मैं और लिखूंगा कि what do we understand here, right? For certain sections of the syllabus, PYQs of course remain important. Okay, that also is an endeavor in our programs also, and which is also in my classes. I ensure that we cover a lot of PYQs. Very important. Coverage of syllabus is also equally important. जो भी term है, जब भी आप exam दे रहे हो, 2026, 2027, whosoever is there, the coverage of syllabus is going to be a very important part of your paper. Okay? Any keyword कुछ भी लिखा है, at least you should be in a position to write a 10, 15 or 20 marker on it. इतना तो होना ही चाहिए. Okay? Other than that, we have seen now comparative questions coming in. For that, I would suggest you make tables. Okay? And you do brainstorming on this part, because this is a more evolving area where new questions are coming in. Fine? Comparative questions. Then additionally, in paper 1B, we saw at least 5 questions around from current affairs. So the new normal for IGP should be that you prepare GS2 and current affairs. Similar, you should also do the same thing for pol science, political science also, that we cover this part as well. So throughout the year, those 10 or 15 topics that are in news, चाहे वो presidential reference हो, चाहे वो article 143 हो, 142 हो, or the governor assent, etc., one should also prepare it knowing that it may get asked. Now it is totally up to the examiner. Sometimes they ask, sometimes they don't ask. But as a student, we should know, yes. Then I also gave you some expected themes and questions. This should be brainstormed. बहुत बार क्या है ना, if you do this hard work, okay, this we of course do in the काफी practice questions in the 300 program and in your test series. But expected themes, if you have prepared, by and large, political science is that one optional that will give you a huge dividend. Okay, so that are the few things I wanted to talk. We will also have a similar detailed analysis on paper 2 as well, most probably a day after, because tomorrow there is another class. I think we'll be occupied in that. Okay. So, and in paper 2, I will also be sharing with you all the list of articles that were in news. From that, the questions would have been asked, which I will also share in the group. Now, the people who are watching it, who are not connected, there is the Sunya IAS channel of PSIR as well. The updates related to PSIR are also shared there. So you can join it, the Sunya IAS channel of PSIR. Iska jo ID hai, I'll just share, so that in case somebody wants to keep a track on the points. Okay, that is @PSIR _optional _Sunya IAS. Okay, that is one. Additionally, if somebody is also preparing for the first time, either for foundation of a crash course or maybe some test series, we also have programs, people online who are watching. So if that is a concern, you can also reach out to us. The numbers will be shared. Okay. Okay, so I think I've been able to tackle all the doubts for the people online. If you still have a doubt, you can drop me a WhatsApp text on this number 93191 78775. I'll try to reply back. Okay. Okay, so I think with that, we'll call it a day today. We'll meet again on Friday. Most probably I'll update the timings on the group also. And this session will also be open. If somebody also wants to attend the session, ask their doubts, ask the way forward, I'll also do that. Okay? So that is the overall discussion, right? Or भी कोई points हैं which you wanted to know, so that you can also let me know. ठीक है? Okay. All right then.